Hello, story enthusiasts. Welcome to Wonder Harry. Today we venture into Gringotts declared number 4 Privet Drive, a magical crime scene, and relocated Harry to Potter Manor overnight. Your support means everything. Like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Edict. The Owl arrived at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Harry knew the time because he'd been lying awake staring at the crack of orange streetlight that came through his curtains, listening to Uncle Vernon snore through the wall like a walrus drowning slowly in a tide of its own contentment. Sleep hadn't come easily since he'd returned from Hogwarts. It rarely did anymore. There was too much noise in his head, Cedric's face, the graveyard, the way Voldemort's wand had felt like cold lightning in the air between them, and the Dursleys' house had a particular talent for making everything worse by offering nothing, not even distraction. He sat up when he heard the tap at the glass. Not Hedwig, she was out hunting. This owl was enormous and tawny and wore a leather satchel across its breast that was stamped in gold with an emblem Harry didn't recognize at first glance. When he pushed the window open, it stepped inside with the gravity of a courier who knew exactly how important its cargo was, held out its leg with professional detachment, and waited. Harry untied the satchel. The owl left without taking a treat, which told him something. Inside the satchel was a single document, rolled and sealed with deep red wax embossed with a goblin's profile and the words Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Office of Magical Inheritance and Estate Law. Below that seal, in smaller script, classified, Lord-level correspondence. Tampering with this document by any party other than the named recipient constitutes a criminal offense under the Goblin Accord of 1782. Harry stared at the words Lord Level for a moment. Then he broke the seal. The document unrolled to about 3 feet of dense, cream-colored parchment covered in precise, angular handwriting that he suspected belonged to a goblin. There was something almost architectural about the letterforms, like they'd been carved rather than written. He sat on the edge of his bed and began to read. To Lord Harrison James Potter Black, heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, heir to the ancient and noble house of Black, by blood adoption, activated upon the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black, his named godfather, and your designated guardian, and primary beneficiary of the Lily Evans Potter Charitable Trust, this correspondence serves as formal notification that Gringotts Wizarding Bank, in its capacity as executor and guardian of the Potter Black estate, has completed a full audit of all assets, accounts, blood ward constructions, magical contracts, and legal instruments pertaining to your person and your inheritance, commissioned following the activation of the estate's heir protection clause on the night of June 24, 1995. The findings of this audit are as follows. 1. The blood wards established at the property known as Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, were constructed without the knowledge or consent of the Potter estate, without your consent, and in direct violation of 3 separate provisions of the Goblin Accord. Said wards were additionally structured in a manner that actively suppress your natural magical development, a fact that constitutes deliberate interference with an heir's inheritance under Clause 14 of the 1834 Magical Inheritance Protection Act. 2. A formal review of your accounts reveals that unauthorized withdrawals have been made from the Potter family trust over the period spanning 1981 to the present day, totaling a sum to be disclosed in full at your earliest appointment. The signatories on these withdrawals were not legally empowered to act on behalf of the estate. 3. Your designated legal guardian, one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, placed you in the custody of non-magical relatives without legal standing to do so, bypassing your father's will, which named Sirius Orion Black as your primary guardian and one Frank Longbottom as secondary guardian. This placement was made unilaterally, and has never been ratified by the Wisengamot. 4. Number 4, Privet Drive, has been formally declared a magical crime scene by the Office of Magical Inheritance and Estate Law. The property will be sealed and assessed. You are no longer legally required, nor legally permitted under estate law, to reside there. Gringotts Wizarding Bank will dispatch a relocation team to your current address at midnight tonight. You will be transported to Potter Manor, Godric's Hollow, your ancestral seat, which has been maintained in trust against this eventuality. Please be prepared to depart. Respectfully, Ragnock, the elder chief of the Goblin Nation, director of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry read the letter twice. Then he put it down on the bed, stood up, and looked around his room, the broken desk, the loose floorboard where he kept his Hogwarts things, the bars still rusting faintly on the window frame from 2 summers ago, and felt something settle in him like a stone dropping through deep water. Not joy, exactly. Not relief. Something quieter and more fundamental than either, like a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed. He had 12 minutes. He moved fast, pulling his trunk from under the bed, flipping it open. Clothes first, not the Dudley hand-me-downs, just his own things from Hogwarts, the ones that actually fit. His robes. His textbooks, which he stacked with practiced efficiency. His photo album, the one Hagrid had made him, which he tucked in the corner of the trunk like something breakable. Hedwig's empty cage. His firebolt, already assembled. The Marauder's map. The invisibility cloak. His wand, which he'd been keeping under his pillow since June because he didn't entirely trust the summer. He was halfway through packing when he heard a sound from outside, not from the street, but from closer, like someone stepping on the garden path, and then a soft knock at the front door. 12 minutes had become 8, apparently. Harry grabbed his trunk, cast a look around the room one more time, at the cupboard that had been his bedroom for the first 10 years of his life, visible through the hallway if he craned his neck, at the wallpaper with its faded pattern of boats that he'd stared at through fevers and nightmares and ordinary bad days too numerous to count, and felt precisely nothing about leaving it. That felt like its own kind of answer. He dragged his trunk down the stairs, managing the noise poorly. The snoring stopped. He heard Vernon's weight shift on the bed, the creak of springs. "Boy!" Vernon's voice, thick with sleep and irritation. "What in blazes?" Harry was already at the front door. He opened it. There were 4 of them on the step. 3 wore the dark uniforms of Gringotts, fitted, functional, no wasted ornamentation, with the gold goblin emblem on the breast. They were armed with something that wasn't wands, short rune-carved rods that hummed with a faint blue light. The 4th was taller than the others, which was still not tall by human standards, with a face that had been weathered by what looked like several centuries of principled contempt. He had sharp amber eyes, a long white braid, and wore a coat of deep burgundy over his uniform that marked him as someone who'd earned the right not to dress like anyone else. "Lord Potter," said the tall one. "I am Ragnock. We spoke by letter, a few minutes ago." "I got your letter," Harry said. "I'm ready." Ragnock looked at his trunk, his broomstick, his owl cage, and gave a single short nod that somehow communicated both approval and the understanding that he'd expected nothing less. "Good. My associates will handle the formal procedures." The 3 uniformed goblins were already moving past Harry into the house with the calm efficiency of people who had a job to do and no patience for obstacles. One of them produced a small device, a brass sphere covered in runes, and began moving it slowly along the walls of the hallway, watching the readout with focused attention. Another unrolled a length of official-looking parchment and began making notes. The 3rd placed small marker stones along the threshold and at the base of the stairs. "What are they doing?" Harry asked. "Forensic ward mapping," Ragnock said. "Everything that was done to this house magically, we document it. Evidence." He said the word with deep satisfaction, like it was something he'd been waiting a long time to use. "The wards here suppressed your magical core by an estimated 37% since you were 15 months old. We know this because your core signatures at age 1 and your current core signatures do not match what the natural progression curve would predict." He looked at Harry steadily. "You should be considerably more powerful than you are, Lord Potter. The house was, to put it plainly, eating you." Harry processed that for a moment. He thought about every spell that had felt just slightly out of reach. Every time his magic had surged past his control in moments of pure instinct. The snake in the zoo, the glass vanishing, the times he'd done things wandlessly under the Dursley's roof that he'd never been able to replicate at school, and felt his jaw tighten. "How much more?" he asked. "We'll know better once you're at the Manor and free of the suppression field." Ragnar's expression was carefully neutral. I suspect the answer will surprise you. The light in the upstairs hallway came on. Potter. Vernon appeared at the top of the stairs in his dressing gown, enormous and red-faced, squinting against the light. He registered the goblins with a visible full-body recoil, like a man who'd discovered something deeply wrong in his kitchen, and his face moved rapidly through confusion, disgust, and a species of fear that he immediately tried to bulldoze with bluster. What is the meaning of this? Who are these, what is going on in my house? Evening, Uncle Vernon, Harry said. You don't take that tone with me, boy, not in my house. It's not your house for the next several hours, said one of the uniformed goblins, without looking up from her rune sphere. Her voice was precise and pleasant in the way that very sharp knives are pleasant to look at. This property has been declared a magical crime scene under the Goblin Accord of 1782, the Magical Inheritance Protection Act of 1834, and 3 subsequent legal instruments. You are permitted to remain on the premises provided you do not interfere with the documentation process. If you interfere, we have the legal authority to remove you. Vernon stared at her. His mouth opened and closed. What crimes? He managed, finally. Harry looked at him. Turns out letting your nephew get magically stunted is a crime, he said. Who knew? We knew, said Ragnar, without any particular inflection. Petunia appeared behind Vernon, thin and pale in her nightgown, and her eyes found Harry immediately. There was something in her face that wasn't the usual pinch dislike, something more complicated, something that might have been guilt if she'd had anywhere to put it. Harry looked at her for a moment. He didn't feel the spike of anger he expected. He didn't feel much of anything, which was somehow both peaceful and very sad. You'll be receiving formal documentation, he said to her, about what happens next. From them, not from me. He nodded at Ragnar's team. I imagine someone will want to talk to you about the last 15 years. Petunia's hand gripped the banister. Harry, I'm not angry, he said, and was surprised to find it was partially true. I'm just done. He turned back to Ragnar. I'm ready when you are. One of the uniformed goblins stepped forward and placed both hands on Harry's trunk. The runes on her wristbands lit briefly, and then the trunk vanished. Not a standard banishing spell, something smoother and more controlled, like it had simply decided to be somewhere else. She gestured for Harry's broomstick. He handed it over. That went too. The owl? Ragnar asked. She's out. She'll find me. He'd learned a long time ago that Hedwig always found him. Then we'll proceed. Ragnar reached into his coat and produced a small disk of worked gold, covered in runes, warm to the touch when Harry took it. Portkey. It will activate in 30 seconds. It will take you directly to the Manor's main entry hall. We'll follow through a separate channel and meet you inside. Harry turned the disk over in his fingers. Through the still open front door, the night air came in off Privet Drive, that particular suburban smell of cut grass and petrol and contained, comfortable lives, and he thought briefly of the very first time he'd left this house for something real, the letter in the envelope, the zoo trip, the night the Hogwarts letters came, a giant man sitting in a storm saying you're a wizard. Harry like it was the simplest and most extraordinary thing in the world. He supposed it had been. Thank you, he said to Ragnar, and he meant it for more things than he could name. Ragnar inclined his head. Don't thank me yet, Lord Potter. The interesting part hasn't started. The disc grew warm in his palm. And then the world snapped sideways, and Privet Drive was gone. The entry hall of Potter Manor was lit when he arrived. Not with electric light, with something older, wall-mounted fixtures shaped like hands cupped around spheres of warm gold light that brightened the moment his feet touched the stone floor, as if the house had been waiting in the dark and recognized him. The floor was polished granite, deep charcoal threaded with veins of silver. The ceiling was high and vaulted. The walls were hung with tapestries that moved slowly, not the moving portraits of Hogwarts, but something more elemental, wind through grass and water over stones, like the house was breathing. Harry stood very still and let it look at him. He wasn't being fanciful. He could feel it, a low, steady awareness that ran through the stone beneath his feet and up through the air around him, something that was surveying him, not with suspicion but with the particular attention of something that had been waiting a very long time and was now taking stock of whether the wait had been worth it. It felt nothing like Hogwarts, which had centuries of accumulated life to it, a warmth built up from thousands of students and teachers and ghosts and arguments and meals and laughter. This was older and more particular. This was his. Right, he said aloud, because it felt right to address it. I'm Harry. The lights went up another degree. One of the tapestries, a landscape with a river, shifted so the river caught sunlight. From somewhere deeper in the house, a door opened without being touched. Harry walked toward it. The room beyond was a library, and his first thought was that Hermione would weep tears of genuine happiness at the sight of it. 3 stories of bookshelves, a rolling ladder on brass tracks, a fireplace already lit, 2 large leather chairs angled toward it, and a desk so substantial it looked like it had grown there. The books themselves were extraordinary, not just in number but in age, spines so old the writing on them was faded to suggestion, newer volumes mixed in without apology. There were also cases of objects, a brass aura with planets Harry didn't recognize, a collection of wands in a glass case with labels, several framed documents that looked legal and important. On the desk was a note. His trunk was already in the corner. His broomstick was propped against the wall. He picked up the note. Light refreshments in the warming cupboard by the fireplace. Your rooms are on the 2nd floor. The house will show you. The main formal meeting room is through the door to the left of the entry hall. We will convene there at 7 in the morning. Our Harry found the warming cupboard. Inside was a plate of sandwiches and a pot of tea that was still hot through what he assumed was a particularly good warming charm, and he ate standing in the library, looking at the books, and tried to organize his thoughts. Someone had been taking money from his vaults. He needed to understand that. Dumbledore had placed him with the Dursleys against his father's explicit wishes. The Blood Wards had been suppressing his magic. He turned each fact over like stones, looking at the undersides. He was not devastated. That was the thing he kept checking for, some pit of grief or betrayal that should be opening under his feet, and it wasn't there. He thought he understood why. He'd always known something was wrong. He'd spent 15 years with the low-grade certainty of someone who has been told a story that doesn't quite add up, accepting each piece of it because he had no alternative. He'd been managed. He'd felt it. He just hadn't had a name for it or evidence to hold. Now he had both. He poured a second cup of tea, took it to one of the leather chairs, and let the fire warm him. Through the library's arched windows he could see a garden in the moonlight, overgrown but not abandoned, the kind of overgrown that suggested things were growing because they wanted to, not because no one cared. Beyond the garden, dark hills. Beyond the hills, nothing he could see. He was, for the first time in his life, exactly where he was supposed to be. He sat with that for a while. Then he finished his tea and went to find his room. The house showed him, exactly as Ragnar's note had promised. Or rather, the lights in the corridor brightened slightly in the direction he needed to go, and when he reached a branch in the hallway, one path was more inviting than the other in a way that was difficult to explain, but impossible to misread. He thought of the Sorting Hat, the way it had weighed him and found him and said not Slytherin with his own voice underneath it. The Manor had that quality, something that knew him and was making accommodations. His room was at the end of a corridor on the 2nd floor. It was large without being ostentatious, a bed with a deep green coverlet, shelves already arranged as if for his things. He saw his photo album had been placed on the nightstand, which he hadn't done, and a window that looked out over the same garden he'd seen from the library. There was a wardrobe big enough to walk into, a writing desk, a bathroom through an adjoining door that was stocked with everything practical. On the wall above the desk hung a painting. Not a magical portrait, a still-life oil painting of 2 people that he recognized from photographs, from a mirror, from a graveyard. James and Lily Potter sat on the steps of what he now understood to be the front steps of this house, laughing at something outside the frame. His mother had flowers in her hair. His father's glasses were crooked, They looked young and happy and entirely unaware of what was coming. Harry stood and looked at it for a long time. "I'm here," he told them, which felt both sufficient and insufficient. He got into bed. For the first time since June, sleep came quickly. He woke at 6 and was downstairs at 5 to 7, which meant he had time to explore what he now identified as the kitchen, enormous, flagstone-floored, with an aga that had apparently been producing heat on its own since he arrived, governed by charms he didn't understand yet but was already interested in. He found eggs and bread and the kind of domestic magic that suggested the Manor's maintenance systems had received some kind of advance notice, because there were groceries that shouldn't have been here yet. He was frying eggs when Ragnarok arrived. Not through the front door. Through the kitchen fireplace, stepping out of a roar of green flame with the casual confidence of someone who had just used the flow for the 10,000th time and found it beneath commenting on. He was accompanied by 2 other goblins, either of the ones from last night, who carried between them a leather case of the sort that looked like it needed to be locked. Ragnarok looked at the eggs. Something shifted in his expression that might, on a human face, have been surprise. "Hungry," Harry said by way of explanation. "Do you want some?" "No." But he sounded less forbidding than he had the night before. He set a briefcase on the kitchen table. The goblins followed his lead, placing the locked case beside it, and settled himself in a chair with the air of someone who has a great deal to say and is deciding where to start. "Tea?" Harry offered. "If you're making it." He made tea for 3. The other 2 goblins declined by the simple method of not acknowledging the offer, which Harry respected as an approach. He plated his eggs, sat down, and gave Ragnarok his complete attention. "Before we begin formally," Ragnarok said, "I want to establish the terms of this relationship, because I find human assumptions about goblins tend to create problems." He wrapped both hands around the tea mug with the pragmatism of someone who wants to warm their fingers, not perform an appreciation. "Gringotts is not doing this because we like you. We do not, as of yet, know you. Gringotts is doing this because the law was violated. The law in question falls within our jurisdiction, and the individuals who violated it assumed we wouldn't notice because they underestimate us habitually." He paused. "They are wrong to do so." "Yeah," Harry said. "I picked that up." "Good. Secondly, the formal hearings, the political proceedings, the Wiesengemat, all of that is coming. But what happens today in this room will determine what shape everything else takes. So I want you to understand what you're looking at before we open these documents." Ragnarok nodded to the assistant at the locked case, who produced a key. "The Potter estate is substantial. Substantial is perhaps not the right word. Historically significant. Your family has been a seat of wizarding power in Britain since the early 17th century, and wealth of that age accumulates in ways that aren't purely financial. There are properties, there are seats on certain boards, there are ancient alliances and treaty obligations that have been dormant. Waiting for me to show up," Harry said. "Waiting for you to show up," Ragnarok confirmed, without any of the reverence people usually wrapped around that concept. "Just fact. The Black Estate layers on top of this through your godfather's blood adoption clause, which activated automatically when Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial. You are, as of this moment, the heir to 2 of the oldest wizarding houses in Britain." He opened his briefcase. "You are also 15 and have been living in a cupboard, which is why I am here rather than simply sending more letters. It was a bedroom for the last few years," Harry said. "They promoted me." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. Then, quietly, almost to himself, the audacity of these people. Harry almost liked him then. The next hour was the most information Harry had ever absorbed in a single sitting that didn't involve a Hogwarts exam, and the difference was that this information was about his actual life. Ragnarok walked him through the vault structure. The trust vault he'd been drawing from since first year was the smallest and least significant of the Potter accounts, the equivalent of a change jar. The main vault held wealth in gold, in assets, in objects and heirlooms, in property deeds, in magical artifacts and library collections and investment holdings that made the Malfoy fortune look, according to Ragnarok's flat delivery, adequate. Then came the harder documents. The unauthorized withdrawals were real. They'd been made through a complex chain of legal instruments, each one citing the last as authority, the kind of thing that takes a long time to construct and relies entirely on no one looking too closely. The ultimate signatory on most of them was a legal office Harry didn't recognize, but one document near the bottom of the chain bore a signature he did, Albus Dumbledore, co-signatory on a guardianship management fund that had been paying for things like the maintenance of the Dursleys' household, various other expenses whose descriptions were vague to the point of meaninglessness, and what was listed simply as operational costs. Harry set that document down flat on the table. How much? He asked. Ragnar told him. It was a large number. Not devastating, the actual loss was small compared to the total estate, but that wasn't the point, and both of them knew it. He didn't need to take it, Harry said. He's the headmaster of Hogwarts. He has money. He did not take it for money, Ragnar said. Control of financial instruments tied to a minor grants the controller substantial legal standing. As long as those instruments existed, your headmaster had legal grounds to speak for your interests in a variety of contexts. Including, he added, Wisengamot hearings about your person. Harry sat with that for a moment. The eggs had gone cold. He ate them anyway because he was still hungry and because going to the trouble of making food and not eating it seemed like the wrong kind of statement to make. He was keeping himself in a position where he could make decisions for me, Harry said. In case he needed to. That is our assessment, yes. And the suppression wards? His voice was steady. He was surprised by how steady it was. Ragnar opened another section of the folder. The wards at Privet Drive were anchored to the blood ward construct your headmaster placed there when you were 15 months old. Ostensibly protective, and to be fair, they were protective against external magical threats. But their secondary function, whether by design or by the particular way they were structured, was to create a feedback loop with your magical core. He laid out a diagram, complex, technical, drawn in that precise goblin hand. Your core produces output, the wards absorb a portion of that output and feed it back into the ward structure itself. You've been powering your own suppression for 15 years. Harry looked at the diagram. He thought about every moment his magic had burst out against his will. The times he couldn't control it, the accidental things, and understood for the first time that those hadn't been failures of control. Those had been his magic working around the suppression. Breaking through anyway. What happens now? He said. Now that I'm here, away from the wards. The feedback loop breaks. Your core will stabilize at its natural level over the next few days. Ragnar considered him with those sharp amber eyes. You may find your magic feels different. More present. We recommend caution with wandless exercises for the first week. Harry nodded slowly. And the manor, it's fully mine. No one can override that. The property deed was held in the Gringotts vault, sealed, pending your majority or an emergency triggering clause. The relocation last night triggered that clause. You are in lawful possession of Potter Manor. Ragnar's eyes held something that might have been satisfaction. No court in Britain, magical or otherwise, has the authority to remove you from your ancestral seat without your consent. Not the ministry, not the Wisengamot. Certainly not a headmaster. Harry thought of Dumbledore's letters, the carefully worded ones that came every summer, checking in with a warmth that had always felt slightly like management. He thought of the way the old man looked at him, with genuine affection. He believed that, but always also with the specific quality of someone reading a chessboard. He didn't hate Dumbledore. That was the complicated part. He understood something about the man's logic, a chess player who believes the sacrifice of pieces is sometimes necessary and spends so long thinking in those terms that he forgets the pieces are people. But understanding the logic didn't make the consequences of it smaller. What do we do next? Harry asked. Ragnar placed his hands flat on the table. 3 things, and in this order. First, you settle in, a week, perhaps less, and you learn this house and you let your magic settle. It would be foolish to walk into political battle while still stabilizing. Second, we file the formal charges with the Wiesengemat, which we have already prepared. He tapped the locked case. Everything is in there. Third, we give the ministry the opportunity to respond correctly, and when they fail to, because they will fail to, we make sure the entire wizarding world knows precisely what was done to you and by whom. He paused. The political architecture of what comes next must be yours, Lord Potter. Gringotts can provide legal standing and evidence. The will to use them has to come from you. Harry looked at the folder, the documents, the diagram of his own suppression laid out in clinical goblin notation. I want to write some letters, he said. Today. There are people I need to talk to. The Manor's outpost will be available to you within the hour. I'll have a secondary address established at Gringotts for any sensitive correspondence you don't want routed publicly. Ragnak began organizing the documents back into the briefcase with the efficiency of someone who had already moved on to the next 12 steps in his head. I would also suggest, Lord Potter, that you explore the library. The section on wizarding inheritance law, in particular, would not be wasted on you. I was going to say the dueling section, Harry said. Ragnak paused for just a fraction of a second. Then he closed his briefcase. Both, he said, which might have been approval. He and his two associates left through the fireplace the way they'd arrived, and Harry was alone in the kitchen with the cold eggs and the morning light coming through the windows at the angle where it caught dust motes, and made them look like suspended gold. He sat there for another minute, letting the silence of the manor settle around him, that steady, breathing quiet that wasn't empty the way Privet Drive's quiet had been empty, but full, like held breath. He thought about Hermione. He thought about Neville. He thought about Sirius, somewhere in hiding, and felt the familiar lurch of helplessness that he'd been living with all summer. But this time, underneath it, something different. Not helplessness. Something more like the moment before you push a door open, when you can feel the weight of it, and you know it's going to move. He went to find parchment. The library, it turned out, had an entire dedicated writing desk near the window, stocked with ink and quills and parchment in several weights, and sealing wax in 3 colors. He took a seat, uncapped the ink, and thought for a moment about how to say everything has changed to someone who wouldn't yet know anything had. Then he started writing. Hermione, don't panic. I'm fine. I'm actually better than fine, which is a strange thing to say given that Gringotts just relocated me out of the Dursleys' house in the middle of the night, but bear with me. There's a lot to explain. I need you to come if you can. Potter Manor. I'll send the address in a second letter through a secure post. Bring your parents if you need to convince them, though knowing you, you'll probably have read enough about wizarding inheritance law to convince yourself. There are things that happened to me that I want to tell you in person, not in a letter. And there are decisions coming that I'm going to need someone who reads everything and is usually right. Come as soon as you can. Harry. He wrote 3 more letters before noon. 1 to Neville, shorter but equally direct. 1 to Arthur Weasley, careful and warm, because he trusted Arthur even when he wasn't certain about the rest of the Weasley situation. And 1 that was the hardest to write, not to Sirius, because he didn't have a safe address, but to a name Ragnak had given him this morning, someone at Gringotts who handled correspondence for individuals whose location was protected. I know where you are now, he wrote to the name on the envelope, the name that was really for Sirius. Or I know how to reach you. I know about the blood adoption clause. I know you've been legal guardian since I was 15 months old. I know why that matters now. You're not going to be in hiding much longer. I promise. Harry. He sealed all 4 letters, carried them to the outpost room that the house had revealed to him by brightening the lights along that corridor again, and sent them out into the clear morning air one by one, watching each owl catch the wind and shrink to a dot against the sky. Then he went back to the library. He pulled the chair close to the fire, because the morning was still cool, and selected a volume from the shelf marked Wizarding Inheritance and Estate Law, Practical Applications, and opened it to the first page. Outside, the Manor's overgrown garden shifted in the early summer wind, green and unhurried and entirely unconcerned with anyone's authority over it except its own. Harry read until lunchtime, and when his magic moved through the room, warm and steady and more present than it had ever felt in his life, like something that had been held underwater was finally breaking the surface. He didn't try to pull it back. He just let it be, settled and quiet and whole. He had a great deal of work to do. He was looking forward to it. Chapter 2. The Manor breeze. The library had its own weather system. Harry discovered this at 2:30 in the afternoon when he looked up from his third book on inheritance law and noticed that the light coming through the arched windows had shifted from gold to the particular silver-gray of an incoming storm, and that somewhere above him, in the upper stacks, 2 floors up where the older volumes lived behind glass-fronted cases, a very faint wind was moving through the pages of a book that he was fairly certain he hadn't opened. He set his own book down and listened. The Manor made sounds the way old things did, sounds that weren't alarming so much as communicative. A creak from the far wall when a cloud moved across the sun. A low hum from somewhere below the floor that came and went with his breathing if he paid attention, which was strange enough that he'd decided to pay attention. The fire shifted without fuel being added. The lights responded to where he was in the room, not to any switch or spell he'd cast, brightening over his shoulder when he read and dimming in the corners he wasn't using, conserving something, or perhaps just being considerate. He'd read enough in the last several hours to have a working theory. The Manor was what the book called a hearth house, a property so old and so consistently occupied by the same bloodline that the accumulated magic of generations had, over centuries, fused with the stone itself. Not sentient in the way a person was sentient, but aware in the way that a river is aware, responsive to certain inputs, shaped by its history, capable of something that wasn't quite thought but was close enough to be useful. The wind in the upper stacks moved again. "All right," Harry said. "Show me." The lights brightened at the base of the rolling ladder. He took that as an invitation, got up, and climbed. The upper stack smelled of old parchment, and something else he couldn't identify, not unpleasant, something herbal and dry, like pressed flowers very old. The glass-fronted cases up here held volumes so ancient they looked less like books and more like geological formations, thick, irregular, bound in materials he didn't want to guess at, some of them labeled in languages he didn't read. But one case was open, not broken open, the glass simply sitting unlatched, swung back on its hinges as if someone had opened it recently, or as if it had opened itself. The book inside was unremarkable looking compared to its neighbors. Dark green leather, spine unmarked, about 300 pages thick. He picked it up carefully and felt, the moment his fingers touched the cover, a small shock, not painful, more like touching a doorknob after walking on carpet, a brief spark of recognition that seemed to run from the book through his hand and up his arm. He opened it. The first page read, in handwriting he recognized from his own face, and his Quidditch reflexes, and the angle of his shoulders, James Fleamont Potter, his commonplace book, 1974. Harry sat down on the floor of the upper stacks, right there on the polished wood between the shelves, and began to read his father's handwriting for the first time. It wasn't a diary, exactly. More like an organized collection of everything James Potter had found interesting in any given period. Spell notes mixed with observations about Quidditch plays mixed with what appeared to be actual academic research mixed with jokes, drawings in the margins, and the occasional entry that was purely personal. Some pages were dense and serious. Some were barely a line long. Sirius put a permanent sticking charm on his own shoe today. Took Madame Pomfrey 3 hours. Worth it. Harry read for 2 hours without moving, not because every page was revelatory but because it was his father's voice, and he had never heard his father's voice in anything that wasn't a photograph or someone else's memory. Here it was live, immediate, thoughtful and funny in turns, with a particular quality of enthusiasm about magic that Harry recognized because he felt it himself, the sense that every new thing discovered was a door onto more doors, that the study of magic was less like learning a subject and more like exploring a country that kept extending its borders. He found one entry that made him stop and read it 3 times. Spent 4 hours in the restricted section today, don't ask, reading about core resonance, and what happens when external wards interact with a developing magical core. The short version, bad. Really bad. The long version, a magical core under sustained suppression doesn't diminish. It adapts. It finds routes around the suppression, consolidates, compresses. And when the suppression is lifted, the release is significant. I think that's the polite word for it. The book used catastrophic, but I think it meant that in a positive way. Note to self, never suppress a developing core. Note to any future child of mine, if someone suppresses your core, the moment you get free, your magic will be looking for an outlet. Give it one. Harry closed the book gently and held it for a moment. Thanks, Dad, he said quietly. The Manor's hum deepened for just a second, like an acknowledgement. He climbed back down the ladder, tucked the commonplace book under his arm, and went to find the kitchen, because it was nearly 5 o'clock and he'd eaten nothing since breakfast and his stomach had started sending formal complaints. The kitchen produced dinner with an efficiency that Harry still couldn't entirely account for. The aga was hot. The cold store, not a refrigerator but something with the same function, a stone alcove with a permanent cooling charm, held enough ingredients to constitute an actual meal rather than just components. He made pasta, which was the kind of cooking he understood well because he'd been doing it for the Dursleys since he was 8, and ate at the kitchen table with his father's commonplace book propped against the teapot, and the evening settling blue outside the windows. Hedwig arrived while he was washing up. She came in through a window he hadn't realized was open. The Manor had opened it. He was starting to understand how that worked, and landed on his shoulder with a self-satisfied rustle that communicated that she'd had a very productive night, and was now prepared to be admired. He scratched behind her ears and she pushed into it like a cat, closing her amber eyes. Good girl. You found the place all right. She nipped his finger gently, meaning obviously. Yeah, all right. She stayed on his shoulder while he dried his hands, then transferred to the back of the kitchen chair nearest the window, which had a view of the garden in the dusk light, and settled into the alert stillness of a bird watching her territory. Harry looked at the garden through the window and made a decision. He went outside. The garden was enormous and, as he thought last night, magnificently overgrown in the particular way of things left to their own logic. There were roses that had become small trees. A kitchen garden section where the herbs had formed alliances and expanded into each other's territory. A stretch of lawn that was more meadow than lawn, long grass full of white flowers that had grown because they wanted to and had clearly been winning that argument for some time. At the far end, a stone wall with a gate that hung slightly open, and beyond that, a view of the hills in the last of the evening light. He walked out across the meadow lawn, feeling the grass against his legs, the cool air, the specific quality of English summer dust that smelled of green growing things and carried a faint dampness even on clear evenings. It was very quiet here. Not Privet Drive quiet, that had been the quiet of suppression, of held breath, of a neighborhood that valued the performance of normalcy above almost everything else. This was the quiet of a place that simply was, that had been for a very long time and expected to keep being, that had no interest in performing anything for anyone. He stopped in the middle of the lawn and looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to make themselves known, and let his magic do what it was apparently going to do regardless. He didn't cast a spell. He didn't reach for his wand. He just relaxed something, some habitual clenching he hadn't known he was always doing, some constant low-level effort of containment that he'd apparently been maintaining for 15 years without realizing it was an effort. Like unclenching a fist he'd been holding so long he'd forgotten his hand was closed. The result was immediate and extraordinary. The grass around him flattened in a perfect circle, pressed down by something that wasn't wind. The white flowers bent outward from where he stood, then sprang back. The air around him went warm for a moment, despite the evening chill, and the stars overhead seemed briefly clearer, the way they look after a rainstorm when every particle of haze has been washed from the atmosphere. And his own hands, he looked down at them, were faintly lit, not visibly to anyone looking, but visible to him, a warmth that moved under the skin like sunlight through water. He took a breath. Then he raised his right hand, pointed at the stone wall at the end of the garden, and thought finite. A block of stone the size of his head sheared itself off the top of the wall, rose 4 feet into the air, rotated once, and set itself back down in a slightly different spot, neat as if it had been placed there by hand. He stared at it. He'd done Wingardium Leviosa on a stone block the size of his head before, and found it moderately taxing. That had been the effort of drawing water uphill. What he'd just done felt like dropping the bucket. "Huh," he said. He spent the next 20 minutes in the garden doing things he'd never been able to do without significant effort, and finding that the effort was either trivial or absent. A full Patronus that burst from him so strong and so fast it lit the garden's silver white before prongs reformed and stood among the overgrown roses looking enormous and calm and deeply at home in a way that made Harry's chest ache. Wandless summoning that reached all the way back to the kitchen and brought his father's commonplace book out through the open door without him having to concentrate. A wall of shield charm that he dropped around himself and felt settle over him as naturally as pulling on a coat. When he walked back inside, he was breathing slightly fast and smiling without realizing it. In the library, the fire had gone low. He rebuilt it with a gesture, lit the lamp at his reading desk with a thought, and settled in with the book on estate law that he'd abandoned earlier. Except now, and he noticed this with a kind of amazed detachment, he was reading it differently. The parts that had felt dense and technical before now had a sort of architectural clarity, like seeing a building from high enough up to understand how all the sections connected. His mind felt faster. Not in the way caffeine felt fast, agitated and fragile, but genuinely quicker, the way a river runs faster when the obstruction upstream is removed. He read until midnight, and what he learned sat in him like ballast, heavy, necessary, stabilizing. Hermione arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock. He heard the flu before he saw her, the whoosh of it from the sitting room he'd opened up after breakfast, which had a fireplace connected to a Flynn network because Ragnar's team had established one the previous night using some process he didn't fully understand but was grateful for. He was in the middle of eating toast and reading the notes he'd taken on Wisengamot procedures when the green flame roared up and she stepped out, carrying a bag so heavy it had developed its own gravitational field, and looked at him with the particular expression she wore when she was simultaneously furious on his behalf and extremely relieved to see him upright. She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at him, really looked, the way Hermione looked at problems, taking inventory. "You look different," she said. "Good different or different. Bigger. Not physically, just..." She gestured with one hand. "Bigger. I'll explain." He nodded at the chair across from him. "Do you want toast?" "I've eaten." She sat down, pulled her bag onto her lap, and immediately started extracting books, which was so purely Hermione that he felt a rush of something warm at the sight of it. "Your letter said there was a lot to explain. I want to hear all of it. Start from the beginning." So he told her. He told it the way he'd found himself organizing it in his head over the last 24 hours, not as a list of offenses but as a sequence of events with a logic to them, because understanding the logic was what made it possible to respond to rather than just be devastated by. The Gringotts audit. The suppression wards. The unauthorized withdrawals. His father's will. The blood adoption clause. The Wisengamot filing that Ragnar's team was preparing. Hermione listened the way she always did when something mattered, completely still, both feet on the floor, her full attention a physical thing you could feel directed at you. She didn't interrupt except twice, once to ask a specific legal question that suggested she'd already been reading about inheritance law before she arrived, and once because she had to stop and be quietly, intensely furious for about 30 seconds before she could continue listening. "He withdrew from your vaults," she said, when he got to that part. "Not large amounts. But the purpose wasn't the money. I know what the purpose was." Her voice was controlled in the way that meant something underneath it was not. "It gave him legal standing. Control of financial instruments tied to a minor creates a guardianship status in wizarding law. It's in the 1847 Inheritance Act, Chapter 9. She looked at the books she'd laid out on the table. "I read it last night. After I got your letter." Harry looked at her. "You read the 1847 Inheritance Act last night." "I read relevant sections." "How many sections?" "Enough. She met his eyes. Harry, this isn't just legally wrong. He knew. He knew what he was doing. He can't have set this up accidentally. No, Harry agreed. He can't. And you trusted him. You've always trusted him. Yeah. She watched him for a moment, looking for the devastation, the same way he'd looked for it himself. He saw her find what he'd found, not absence of feeling, but something steadier and colder that had replaced it. She seemed to settle into that, accepting it, cataloging it. How are you? Better than yesterday, he said, which was genuinely true. Better than I've been in. He thought about it. A long time, actually. Because you're angry? Because I'm doing something about it. He paused. And the magic thing? Come outside, I'll show you. She followed him into the garden with the practical acceptance of someone who had seen enough extraordinary things that one more barely required ceremony. He showed her what he'd discovered the previous evening, the wandless work, the ease of it, the Patronus that burst from him in full silver daylight without costing him anything. Hermione watched Prongs gallop across the overgrown lawn and said nothing for almost a full minute. 37% suppression, she said finally. That's what Ragnak said. Your Patronus was already fully corporeal in third year. She was watching Prongs pace back toward them, enormous and light-footed. Under 37% suppression. Harry, I know. No, I mean, I've read about the theoretical power ceiling for corporeal patron uses at age 13. What you should have been producing at, Hermione. She stopped. Looked at him. Laughed once, slightly shakily. Right. Right, yes. The point is it's extraordinary, not a mass problem. She watched the Patronus until it dissolved slowly into the morning air. The Manor helped? The Manor removed the thing that was stopping me from being what I already was. He looked at the house, the stone of it, weathered and solid, the ivy on the east wall, the chimneys going up against a blue sky. That's a different thing. She followed his look. It's beautiful, she said simply. Come inside. I want you to see the library. The library broke her in the best possible way. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it in, and then made a sound that was technically not a word but communicated everything, and walked directly to the nearest shelf and began reading spines. Harry sat down in the leather chair and watched her with the comfortable patience of someone who knew that Hermione Granger in a library needed exactly as much time as she needed and not a moment less. She was still reading spines when Neville arrived. He came through the flow looking slightly singed at the edges, which was standard for Neville and Fleur travel, but also looking alert in a way Harry didn't usually associate with him, a particular quality of readiness, like something in the letter had sharpened him. He looked around the library with wide eyes, and then at Harry, and then at Hermione, who had opened a book and was reading standing up. She's been here 5 minutes, Harry said. That tracks. Neville crossed the room and they shook hands, and then, because they were who they were and there was nobody else to perform restraint for, embraced briefly and firmly. When Neville stepped back, his expression was the kind of complicated honest that Harry had always valued in him. Your letter said you were fine? You look fine. I am fine. You said that in a letter from a house I didn't know you had. Neville looked around again, taking it in with the particular appreciation of someone who also came from old wizarding stock and understood what a house like this meant. Potter Manor. Potter Manor. Gran's going to have opinions. Neville sat down. She's already having opinions. I had to convince her not to write to the Wisengamot herself this morning. Harry smiled at that. Tell her I'd like to talk to her. She might want to know what Ragnak told me about the formal proceedings. Neville's expression shifted. Harry. What did happen? The letter said Gringotts relocated you, and that's not a small thing. Gringotts doesn't declare crime scenes for fun. No, Harry agreed. Sit down and I'll tell you. He told Neville what he told Hermione. The difference in response was instructive. Where Hermione had been quietly furious, organized, processing everything through the architecture of what it meant legally and strategically, Neville's face did something simpler, and more immediate. He went still in the particular way he went still when something mattered. And when Harry reached the part about his father's will, the named guardians, the order of placement, the fact that it had been ignored, Neville said quietly, "Frank Longbottom. Your dad named my dad." "Secondary guardian, yes." Neville was quiet for a moment. "My dad's in St. Mungo's." "I know. He's been there since I was a year old." "I know." Harry looked at him. "I'm not telling you that to reopen something awful. I'm telling you because it's in the file that Ragnar's building, and when this goes to the Wisengamot, the fact that both of James Potter's chosen guardians were rendered unavailable while Dumbledore placed me somewhere else without legal authorization, that's a pattern, Neville. That's not coincidence." Neville looked at the fire. His jaw was set. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know yet. I'm saying we need to find out." Harry leaned forward. "And I'm saying that when we find out, I want you with me." "Yeah," Neville said without hesitation, like it hadn't required deliberation. "Obviously." Hermione arrived back from the shelves with 3 books under her arm and a focused expression. "I found the section on Wisengamot criminal procedure," she said to Harry. "Also 2 volumes on estate law that I think are more current than what Ragnar gave you, and—" She glanced at Neville. "Oh, hi Neville. Good, you're here. We're going to need someone who knows the old family protocols." "Apparently," Neville said, with the mildly dazed expression of someone who had just sat down and been immediately assigned a role. "The Longbottom estate has Wisengamot seats," Hermione said, not unkindly but with absolute efficiency. 3 of them, if I remember what I read, yes, 3. And the Longbottoms have been allied with the Potters since." She checked her book. 1692. "That's not just history, that's a legal instrument that still has force." She looked at Harry. "If Neville's grandmother exercises those seats in support of your filing, the Wisengamot can't dismiss it as a minor's complaint. It becomes an inter-house formal grievance." Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked at Harry. "Gran," Neville said slowly, "is going to want to be in the front row for whatever comes next." "Think she'd come here?" Harry asked. "I'd like to meet her properly. And I'd like to talk about the alliance. I know that sounds formal and strange, but I need to start doing this properly. The old way, the way it has force." Neville pulled out his own wand and conjured a piece of parchment with a competence that Harry noted with quiet satisfaction. Neville was growing into himself, the same way Harry was, just along a slightly different axis. "I'll write to her tonight. She'll come. She'll complain about foot travel the entire time, but she'll come." The 3 of them spent the afternoon in the library, and it had the quality of those evenings in the Gryffindor common room before exams where the work was real and the urgency was real, but the company made it almost pleasurable. Hermione reading and annotating with terrifying speed, Neville working through the old family protocol volumes with a careful thoroughness. Harry reading the estate law and the Wisengamot procedures and taking notes in the margins of his own parchment with his father's old self-inking quill that he'd found in the desk drawer and had immediately decided was his now. Ragnar returned at 5 through the flow without particular ceremony, registered Hermione and Neville with a single sweeping glance, and said to Harry, "Good. You've started building your position." He looked at Hermione's stack of books. The 1847 Act, Chapter 9 through 12, and the 1923 Reform legislation. There's a case from 1956, Gringotts versus the Ministry of Magic, that established the relevant precedent for bank-initiated Wisengamot complaints. It's in the upper stacks. On it, Hermione said, already moving toward the ladder. Ragnar watched her go. "Useful," he said to Harry, which was high praise. "She's the best there is," Harry said. "I know. We have a file on her as well." Harry blinked. "You have a file on Hermione?" "We have files on anyone relevant to the Potter estate." He settled himself in the 3rd leather chair with the familiarity of someone who decided it was his for the duration. "Your red-headed friends as well, though that family's situation is more complicated. The ministry employee father, the relationship requires careful management." Arthur Weasley is a good person, Harry said, with enough quiet authority that Ragnar paused. I don't doubt it. I said complicated, not untrustworthy. He looked at Harry steadily. You'll need to develop a precise vocabulary for the distinction. The political world you're entering rewards precision. I'm 15. You have an ancestral seat, 3 vault holdings, and a formal grievance against the most powerful wizard in Britain. Ragnar's expression was dry and complete. Adjust accordingly. He opened his briefcase. The day's business began. What Ragnar brought that evening shifted the ground under all of them. The documents in the briefcase were the formal charges, not the filing itself, which would happen in a week, but the full inventory of what they were charging, laid out in the legal language that gave it teeth. Harry sat with Hermione on one side and Neville on the other and Ragnar across from them, and they went through it together, and by the end of an hour, the library was very quiet. The blood wards and core suppression. The unauthorized vault withdrawals. The illegal bypassing of the Potter will. But then Ragnar had reached into the case and produced something else, a smaller folder, marked differently, in a red that was somehow more serious than the rest. This is the part, he said, that we did not include in the first letter, because I wanted to assess you in person before I gave it to you. Harry looked at him. And? You didn't panic. You ate breakfast and you made tea. Ragnar put the folder on the table between them. There is a codicil in your parents' will. Not the main will, an addendum, filed separately, sealed, accessible only to the primary heir on the event of certain triggering conditions being met. Gringotts has held it for 14 years. What triggering conditions? Hermione asked. The death of Albus Dumbledore, the formal declaration of Voldemort's return, or... He looked at Harry. A Gringotts formal audit finding of misconduct against the heir. The audit, Harry said. Triggered last night, yes. He pushed the folder toward Harry. Your parents wrote this when you were 4 months old. I believe they suspected something. I believe your mother, who was, the records suggest, extraordinarily gifted, had begun to understand what Dumbledore's involvement in their lives actually represented. I want you to read it. Tonight. Then we'll speak tomorrow. Harry took the folder and didn't open it, not yet. He held it flat on his hands and felt, again, that sense of his parents reaching through time, not the desperate, tragic reaching of the Mirror of Eris, but something more deliberate, more like a letter written by someone who understood they might not be there to deliver it in person, and so had been very careful with the words. Neville and Hermione both looked at him. Neither said anything. I'll read it tonight, Harry said. There is one more thing, Ragnar said. The letter to your godfather was received. An acknowledgement was returned this afternoon. He produced a single piece of parchment, very small, the writing cramped in a way that suggested it had been written small deliberately, in case of interception. Harry unfolded it. Harry. I knew. I've always known something was wrong, but I couldn't. There's a lot I need to explain, and I can't do it in writing. I need to know you're safe first. Are you safe? I heard about the manor. Your dad used to take me there in summers. The library has a section on the second floor that your grandfather built, and it smells like old paper, and the fireplace in the master sitting room has a secret panel to the left of the mantelpiece that your dad put in himself in 1976 and never told anyone about, and I know because I helped. Tell me you're safe. Snuffles Harry read it twice. Then he folded it back up and put it in the pocket over his heart. He's all right, Harry said to the room in general, and his voice came out steadier than he expected but not entirely even. Hermione's hand covered his on the table for a moment, and then she went back to her notes, which was exactly the right thing to do. He read the codicil that night. He sat in the library, just him and the fire in the sleeping house, and he unfolded his parents' last careful message to him and read every word of it, and when he finished he sat still for a long time. His mother's handwriting was neat and precise and moved through the legal language with the confidence of someone who drafted the thing carefully. What they knew, what they suspected, what they wanted Harry to have access to, and what actions they wanted Gringotts to take on his behalf. It was everything the main will had been, practical and thorough and forward-thinking. But the last paragraph was his father's handwriting. Harry, I hope you never have to read this, because if you're reading this it means things went wrong in ways I can't fully anticipate yet. But I also hope, and this is the strange part, that if you do have to read it, you're reading it because you've figured out what we figured out, and you're doing something about it. Your mother says I'm optimistic to a fault, and she's usually right, but I genuinely believe that you'll be all right. I believe it in my bones. The Potters have always come through the worst things intact, not unscathed, but intact, and I think you've got that in you. Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of. Especially not anyone who benefits from your believing their version. The house is yours. Let it know you. It'll know you back. We love you. We always will. Dad. Harry put the document down on the desk and let the fire crackle and shift and fill the silence. The Manor's hum was low and steady around him, in the walls, in the floor, in the air. He put one hand flat on the surface of his father's desk, feeling the grain of the old wood, and felt the house feel him back. I know, he said quietly, to no one and to everything at once. I'm figuring it out. He slept in the library chair that night, and didn't dream of anything at all. By the end of the second day, the Manor had started to feel like home. Not in the performative way that Privet Drive had performed homeliness. The matching curtains, the pride of the lawn, the appearance of normalcy maintained with exhausting vigilance. Home the way that word meant when you stripped everything else off it, a place that knew you and held you without requiring anything of you in return. Hermione left at 9 that evening with 5 books borrowed under what Harry suspected was an informal agreement she'd struck with the library itself, and the promise to return with her parents the following day because she wanted them to meet Harry properly and because she had questions about Muggle wizarding legal interface that she thought might be relevant. Neville left at 10, quieter than he'd arrived, with the specific thoughtfulness of someone who has spent a day processing things that changed the shape of what he'd believed. Harry saw them off through the fleur and stood in the sitting room afterward, hands in his pockets, feeling the house settle around him in the evening quiet. He went to the fireplace in the main sitting room, not the library, the other one, the one that would be the master sitting room when he understood the house better, and stood to the left of the mantelpiece. He pressed his hand against the stonework there, feeling for a panel, about 14 inches wide, hinged on one side. It swung open quietly, not stiff at all, as if it had been used recently. Inside, a small hollow space, the size of a deep windowsill. Empty now. But it had clearly held things once. There were marks in the dust where objects had rested, and chalked onto the back of the panel in faded, unmistakable handwriting, property of the Marauders. No entry without prior application. Harry laughed. He laughed properly, head back, the sound of it going up through the old house, and the lights in the room went up a notch and the fire crackled bright and something shifted in the stone around him that might have been 200 years of a house deciding, finally, that this was exactly the right person to have brought home. He wrote to Sirius that night. He told him about the panel. He told him about the estate law, the Wisengamot filing, the codicil. He told him that whatever came next, he wasn't doing it carefully and quietly. He told him the interesting part was starting. And then he went to bed, and slept deeply, and in the morning the garden caught the summer light through his window and the whole house hummed with something that wasn't quite anticipation but was close. Very close. Chapter 3. Letters and Lightning. Augusta Longbottom arrived through the fleur at precisely 8 in the morning, wearing a hat with a stuffed vulture on it that Harry suspected was not decorative but territorial, and she looked around Potter Manor's entry hall with the expression of someone who has been expecting to be impressed and is not going to admit it easily. She looked at Harry. Harry looked at her. "Lord Potter," she said, and her voice had the quality of good oak, dense, resistant to anything less than genuine force. "Lady Longbottom," Harry said. "Thank you for coming. Neville said you'd have opinions." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not quite, but the precursor to one, the thing that happens in the muscles around the eyes when someone has been surprised by a person and is deciding what to do about it. "He was right," she said. "I have a great many opinions. Shall we begin?" Kitchen's through there, Harry said. I'll make tea. She followed him, which he suspected she didn't do for many people, and sat at the kitchen table with the spine-straightness of someone who had been bred to project authority, but had long since stopped thinking about it consciously, because authority had simply become her default state. She looked around the kitchen with a more particular attention than she'd given the entry hall, noting things, cataloging, reading the room the way someone reads a room when they knew it once and are checking it against memory. I was here, she said, while Harry filled the kettle. Once. For a summer dinner, 1979. Your parents were. They were very good hosts. Your mother made something with lemons that I've never been able to replicate. Harry set the kettle on the alga. I found my dad's commonplace book in the library. His recipe notes are in there. She looked at him with sharpened attention. You found James's commonplace book. In the upper stacks. The house showed me where it was. She was quiet for a moment. The house showed you. She repeated, not skeptically but with something that was closer to wonder, which sat oddly on a face built for authority. Then it knows you. Seems like. Good. The wonder packed itself away and she was entirely Augusta Longbottom again. Then let's talk about what happens next, because I have been waiting 14 years for someone to begin doing something about the various disasters that have been allowed to accumulate in this community, and I find I'm not inclined to waste time being coy about it. Harry brought the tea, sat down across from her, and they talked for 2 hours. Augusta Longbottom, it turned out, was furious. Not in the way of someone who had just discovered something outrageous. In the way of someone who had known for a very long time that something was wrong, had tried to address it through proper channels, had been managed and deflected and politely ignored by Albus Dumbledore for over a decade, and had subsequently developed a quiet, comprehensive anger that had nowhere to go until now. She laid it out with the directness of someone who had stopped being diplomatic about it years ago. She had raised concerns about Harry's placement with the Dursleys through 3 different legal instruments after James and Lily's deaths. She had questioned the lack of a formal guardianship hearing. She had tried, twice, to have Sirius Black's case reviewed, because she had known Sirius, not well, but well enough to find the story of his sudden betrayal deeply inconsistent with the man she'd observed. Each effort had been met with the particular Dumbledore response that she could now describe from memory: warm, reasonable, comprehensive explanation of why everything was fine and why her concerns, while entirely understandable, were based on incomplete information. He was never rude, she said with specific distaste. Rude I could have worked with. He was kind. And thorough. And he always had an answer. She wrapped both hands around her teacup. It took me several years to understand that a man who always has an answer is not necessarily a man who is always right. He believes he's right, Harry said. That's the thing. I don't think he's calculated and cynical about it. I think he genuinely believes that what he did was necessary. Augusta looked at him with the expression she seemed to save for moments when she was being surprised by him. You're being generous. I'm being accurate, Harry said. If I think he's a villain, I'll handle him wrong. He's not a villain. He's a very powerful man who decided that the best way to protect the world was to control the variables, and I was the most important variable, so. He spread his hands. Here we are. Augusta was quiet for a moment. You've thought about this carefully. I've had 2 days in a very good library. Yes. She looked into her teacup. Neville thinks very highly of you. He has for some time. I used to worry it was misplaced admiration. And now? She looked up. I am revising my assessment. She set down her teacup with the decisive clink of someone moving from one phase of the meeting to the next. The Longbottom seats. You want them exercised in support of your filing. I want it if it's offered freely, Harry said. I'm not asking you to do something you're not certain about. I am absolutely certain. No hesitation, not a fraction of one. The question is terms. Not financial terms. The alliance documents are clear on the financial side. I mean the terms of what we're doing together. I want to know what you're actually building, Lord Potter. Because filing charges is one thing. What comes after is another. Harry looked at her across the table. Outside the kitchen window, the summer morning was fully established now, the garden in strong light, the hills beyond the wall green and unhurried. He'd been thinking about this question for 2 days, the what comes after, and he had an answer, but it was a big answer, and he wanted to give it to someone who could hear it properly. "I'm not trying to become the most powerful person in the wizarding world," he said. I don't want that. But there's something coming, and when it arrives, the current structure isn't going to be adequate. The ministry is corrupt or compromised or both. The Wizengamot has seats held by people who care more about their own positions than about what's right. And Dumbledore's model, one person makes the decisions because one person knows best, that's failed. I'm the evidence that it's failed. He paused. What I want to build is something that can actually fight. Not just Voldemort, the conditions that let Voldemort happen. The ministry looking away. People being afraid to use the name. A community that's been trained to wait for a leader to fix everything instead of fixing it themselves. Augusta was very still. The Wizengamot filing is the beginning. Harry continued. It establishes that there are laws and they apply to everyone, including Albus Dumbledore. After that, I want alliances with old families who still believe in those laws. I want people in positions where they can act. And when Voldemort moves, because he will move, he's already gathering, I want to meet him with something that isn't just me and my friends improvising. The kitchen was quiet. My husband believes something very similar, Augusta said finally, in a different voice, lower, less formal, the voice of something older and more personal. He spent the First War trying to build exactly that kind of coalition. He got close. She stopped. Close wasn't enough. I know, Harry said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Learn from it. She straightened. Frank was a good man and a poor politician. You appear to be something different. She nodded once, definitively. The Longbottom seats are yours to call on. I'll be in contact with Lady Bones and Lord Greengrass. Both of them have been sitting on similar frustrations for years. And I'd like to meet your goblin, Ragnarok. If he's as competent as the paperwork suggests. More, Harry said. She nodded again. Tonight, then. She stood, and the authority came back like a garment she'd set aside for a moment. Tell Neville to bring good robes. This is the sort of moment that merits the effort. She left through the flue, and the kitchen felt larger in her absence, not emptier, but like a room that had been confirmed as significant, the way rooms feel after a meeting where something real got decided. Harry sat for a moment, then went to write more letters. The letter to Arthur Weasley came back fastest. He'd sent it to the ministry with a personal marker on the outside so it would reach Arthur directly rather than going through any kind of general post system. Ragnarok had suggested it, and Harry hadn't asked how it worked, just trusted the mechanism. Arthur's reply arrived 3 hours later by a small brown owl that looked faintly apologetic about the whole business of delivering correspondence, and the letter inside was written in Arthur's practical, warm hand on ministry notepaper. Harry, I can't write everything I want to say in a letter, and I suspect you know why. There are people here who notice things. I want you to know that Molly and I, Molly especially, are going to want to talk to you. She's worried. You know how she gets. I've told her you're all right, but she'd like to hear it herself. The things you've described in your letter, I want to say I'm surprised. I want to say that very much. I find I can't entirely. Percy is being Percy. Ron is furious on your behalf, which I imagine you expected. The twins said, and I am quoting directly. Finally. Ginny said nothing but looked the kind of determined that her mother sometimes gets, which means she's thinking. I'll come Saturday if that's agreeable. Alone for now. Some conversations want a smaller room. Keep safe. Harry read it twice, appreciating the careful navigation of it. Arthur saying everything he needed to say without saying anything that would be dangerous if intercepted. I find I can't entirely surprised was doing a great deal of work in that letter, and Harry respected the precision. He wrote back, Saturday is perfect. Bring your curiosity. Harry. The harder letter came that afternoon. He'd been expecting it. He'd been expecting it since the night he left Privet Drive, had tracked its inevitable arrival the way you track weather. You can see it coming from far enough away to prepare, but that doesn't make it not a storm. It arrived by Fawkes. The phoenix appeared in the library in a small burst of golden flame that was nothing like flow of fire, cleaner, warmer, with a sound like a low chord, and landed on the back of the leather chair with the elegant certainty of a creature that has never doubted its welcome anywhere. He carried a single letter in his beak, sealed with Hogwarts crest, and looked at Harry with amber eyes that held something complex and bird-like and very old. "Hello, Fawkes," Harry said. Fawkes made a sound low in his chest, not his full song, just a fragment, but even the fragment did what Phoenix song always did, move through Harry like warm water, touching everything sore and making it temporarily livable. "You're not going to make me feel bad about this," Harry told him. "Just so you know." Fawkes ruffled his feathers and made another sound that might have been concession. Harry took the letter. Fawkes didn't leave, just settled into the chair back and watched with the patience of something that has been watching important moments in human lives for a very long time, and has learned not to rush them. He broke the seal. "My dear Harry, I have spent the last 3 days composing and discarding versions of this letter, which I suspect tells you something about my state of mind. I am not, as a rule, a man who struggles to find words. I find I am struggling now. I want to say first, and I hope you will believe it, that everything I have done has been done because I love you. I know how that sounds in light of what you have apparently discovered. I know it may feel like the least satisfying possible explanation. But I ask you to hold it alongside everything else, because it is true, and the truth of it does not cancel what was wrong, but neither does what was wrong cancel it. I should have told you more. I should have found a way to give you the information and the agency that were yours by right, rather than keeping them from you in the belief that ignorance was protective. I was wrong. I have known for some time that I was wrong, and I told myself the timing was not yet right, and I was wrong about that too. The wards were intended as protection. I understand that you have learned their secondary effects. I want you to know that those effects were not intentional. I chose that house because of your mother's blood sacrifice, and I did not know, did not check, did not look carefully enough, what the sustained proximity of suppressive blood magic would do to a developing core over 15 years. That failure belongs to me. The financial instruments are less easy to explain. I will not insult you by trying. I would very much like to speak with you in person about them. I recognize that I have no standing to ask you for anything. I am asking anyway, because I have found that the right thing and the comfortable thing have very little overlap at my age. Please come to Hogwarts, or permit me to come to you. Not to argue. I have no argument to make that would be adequate. To speak plainly, which I should have done years ago. Whatever you think of me now, Harry, and I find I cannot blame you for thinking it, I remain, in every sense that matters to me, your servant, and your admirer, and I hope, still something you might one day call a friend. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it once. Then he set it down, face up, on the desk, and sat with it for a few minutes. Fawkes watched him. "He writes a good letter," Harry said. "He's genuinely sorry. I think he's genuinely sorry." Fawkes made the low chord sound again. "The thing is," Harry said, "sorry doesn't undo the structure. Sorry doesn't change the fact that there are things in motion now that needed to be in motion years ago, and the only reason they weren't is that he decided they shouldn't be." He looked at the letter. "If I go to him now, if I respond to this by going to Hogwarts and having the conversation he wants, on his terms, in his space, I'm starting from the position he set up. Which is exactly where he's most effective." He picked up his quill. He wrote for 15 minutes, the letter coming out clean and composed, because he'd had time to think about it. "Professor Dumbledore, thank you for writing. I mean that, I know what it cost, and I'm not dismissing it. I'm not going to Hogwarts, and I'd prefer you didn't come here, not yet. Not because I'm angry with you, I'm a lot of things right now, and angry is in there somewhere, but it's not the loudest one. The loudest one is that I need to do the next several things without your involvement, because your involvement, even well-intentioned, has historically meant your management, and I'm done being managed. The proceedings with Gringotts and the Whisked are going forward. I'm not asking your permission, and I'm not asking you to stay out of them. You'll do what you think is right, you always do. But I'm asking you not to contact me again before the hearing. Not because I want to punish you. Because I need the space to think clearly. After the hearing, we'll talk. I think we need to. But it has to be different than it's been. Harry, he sealed it, held it out to Fawkes. The Phoenix looked at the letter, then at Harry, with those old amber eyes that had seen empires and wars and probably several other 15-year-old boys at pivotal moments in history. I know, Harry said. He's not going to like it. Fawkes took the letter gently in his beak, spread his wings, each one the width of Harry's arm span, and disappeared in a burst of golden flame that left the library smelling briefly like warm metal and summer. Harry sat back in his chair and let the silence fill in. Hermione arrived through the flue an hour later, parents in tow, Richard and Helen Granger, who were dentists and consequently people who dealt professionally with the gap between what was visible and what was happening underneath, which Harry suspected gave them an unusual quality of perceptiveness. They looked around Potter Manor with the particular interest of intelligent people encountering something genuinely outside their experience, and they looked at Harry with the frank assessment of parents who were trying to establish whether he was someone their daughter should trust. He made them tea. He answered their questions, the sensible, direct questions that people asked when they hadn't grown up in a world where asking sensible, direct questions was considered bad form. Yes, the bank had really removed him from his relative's house. No, he didn't think it was going to be dangerous here, or at least, not more dangerous than it had already been. No, he didn't have a legal guardian formally in place yet, but that was being addressed. Yes, Hermione would be completely safe. He said this last one looking at Richard Granger specifically, and Richard Granger looked back at him for a moment and then nodded once, which Harry understood as a pass test. She said you're the one who taught the DA, Helen Granger said. She had Hermione's precision but deployed it differently, less like a scalpel, more like a key. We all taught each other, Harry said. That's not what Hermione says. Harry smiled. She's generous. She's accurate, Helen said, with the same directness her daughter used when she was tired of people being falsely modest. She says you're the best defense teacher she's had, and Hermione does not give that kind of assessment casually. She also said you keep putting yourself in front of things to protect people, Richard added, not accusatorially but with the quiet attention of a man building a picture. Occupational hazard, Harry said. The Grangers exchanged a look that was doing 20 years of accumulated communication in 2 seconds, and then they both appeared to decide something, and Helen smiled with Hermione's exact smile, and Richard asked if there was more tea, and the afternoon settled into something that felt, unexpectedly, domestic. The meeting with Augusta and Ragnarok that evening was the first time Harry felt the shape of what he was building come into full clarity. They gathered in the formal meeting room, the one through the door to the left of the entry hall that Harry had been avoiding because it had the quality of a room waiting for something important. It was justified in waiting. Long table, 8 chairs, a fireplace at each end, wall sconces that lit when people entered, and a quality of soundproofing that was either architectural or magical, possibly both, that made the room feel sealed against the outside world. Augusta sat at one side with Neville, who had arrived an hour earlier wearing robes that Harry recognized as formal by their quality, and the way Neville held himself in them, straighter, more deliberate, as if the robes were reminding him of something he sometimes forgot. Hermione sat beside Harry with 3 books and a notebook. Ragnarok sat at the head of the table because he had chosen that seat without discussing it, and no one had been inclined to argue. The 2 goblins who always accompanied Ragnarok stood at the walls. Harry had started thinking of them as constant and present, because they were always there and never introduced themselves. The filing is complete, Ragnarok said without preamble. It was submitted to the Whisked Office of Grievances this morning at 8 o'clock, simultaneously with a copy to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a copy to the office of the Minister for Magic, and a full copy to the Daily Prophet. There was a beat of silence. The Prophet? Augusta said. The filing is a matter of public record under Section 12 of the Whisked Transparency Act of 1901. Ragnock said. Gringotts exercised our right to provide a public record copy to the press. The Prophet will receive it. What they do with it is their choice. His expression suggested he had formed a strong opinion about what they would do with it. But it cannot now be quietly suppressed, which was a risk with a filing submitted only through official channels. Harry had known about this. He and Ragnock had discussed it the previous morning, the need to make the filing simultaneously public and official, to remove the possibility of it being handled privately between Dumbledore and the Ministry before anyone else knew it existed. It was the kind of move that his father's commonplace book described as making the private public before the powerful can make it disappear, in notes from a lecture James had apparently attended in 1976, which suggested the Potter family had thought about this sort of thing for a while. "What's in the filing?" Hermione asked, though Harry knew she'd read most of the documents. She was asking for the benefit of the formal record. Ragnock listed the charges in the clipped, precise language of a goblin who understood that legal language had power precisely because of its specificity. Course suppression via unauthorized ward placement. Fraudulent exercise of financial guardianship instruments. Violation of a valid wizard's will. Unlawful unilateral custody assignment. 14 years of compounding interest on the unauthorized vault withdrawals, which came to a figure that Augusta received without expression but that made Neville's eyebrows rise. The named respondent, Ragnock said, is Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The Ministry of Magic is listed as a secondary respondent for failure to oversight, which is a different and lesser charge, but it creates the formal record that we want. Fudge is going to have a fit, Harry said. Fudge is going to have several fits, Ragnock agreed, with visible satisfaction. He will have the opportunity to either support the filing and appear responsible, or oppose it and appear complicit. We have structured the filing to make the second option as politically uncomfortable as possible. Augusta was nodding slowly, with the expression of someone watching a piece of strategy and recognizing the craft in it. You've done this before, she said to Ragnock. Not precisely this, Ragnock said. But the architecture of using legal process to force a political moment, yes. Goblins have had considerable practice. We'll vote to support the hearing, Augusta said. The Longbottom seats. All three, which means we can formally request an expedited schedule. She looked at Harry. A standard hearing timeline is 3 to 6 months. An expedited request, supported by 2 or more ancient houses, brings it to 30 days. 30 days? Harry said. Are you ready in 30 days? She asked, with no softness in it, a genuine question, not a challenge. Harry thought about the last 2 days. The magic settling in him, finding its level, the wandless work that had been getting easier every morning. The documents he'd read. The alliances taking shape around this table. The letter he'd sent Dumbledore and the fact that he meant every word of it. I'll be ready in 20, he said. Nobody laughed. Neville was the only one who smiled, and he did it quietly, like someone filing something important. 3 things happened that night that would have kept the old Harry awake with anxiety. The new one noted them, filed them, and went to sleep. The first was a brief article in the evening edition of the Daily Prophet, not the full filing, that would come tomorrow, but a short piece in the inside pages under the heading Gringotts files formal complaint against senior wizarding official that was careful not to name names, but made it clear enough to anyone paying attention. Harry read it with Hermione over dinner, and they looked at each other, and he said, "Tomorrow's going to be louder." And she said, "Yes." And they ate pasta. The second was a letter from Ron. It was very Ron, messy handwriting, crossed out words, a postscript that was longer than the body. Harry, mate, what is actually happening? Fred and George keep laughing about something and won't tell me, and Mum has been making stress soup for 2 days, which only happens when something big is going on. Are you all right? Hermione told me you're fine, but in the way she says things when she knows more than she's saying. Write me properly. Or I'll ask Hermione, and she'll explain it for an hour, and use the word furthermore at least 4 times. Ron, P.S. Whoever you're doing this to, they deserve it. I don't know the whole thing yet, but I know you, and you don't do stuff like this for fun. P.P.S. The twins are definitely laughing about it. Harry wrote back and told him everything. Not the careful version, the actual version, because Ron deserved the actual version, always had, and one of the things Harry had been thinking about in the last few days was that managing what people knew to protect them was Dumbledore's mode, not his. He sealed the letter and felt better for having sent it. The third thing was the lightning. He'd gone to the garden after dinner, as had become his habit. The garden in the evening had a quality he was already coming to rely on, something about the scale of the sky and the unhurried dark of the hills, and he was standing in the meadow lawn looking at the stars when he felt it. Not weather lightning. Something else. A directional pull in his magic, like a compass responding to north, sudden, clear, pointing in one direction with an urgency that he'd never felt before. He'd heard enough about Voldemort's plans to know what it might mean when his scar was quiet, but his magic was loud, and he turned to face the direction it pointed, which was south-southeast, toward London, and waited. Nothing came. The pull faded after 40 seconds, leaving him alert and still in the dark garden with the owls calling from the tree-line. He thought about the diary. About the chamber. About the graveyard. About the way Voldemort's magic had felt in that terrible moment of connection, ancient, cold, vast in the way of deep water, something that had spent decades being concentrated into a single point of obsession and hatred. He thought about his own magic, which was none of those things. Which was warm and fast and getting faster every day, which felt like sunlight through water and moved through him without restriction now, which had exploded outward last night when he was barely trying and flattened the grass in a 20-foot circle around his feet. He thought about his father's words, when the suppression is lifted, your magic will be looking for an outlet. Give it one. He raised his wand, not wandlessly, deliberately choosing the wand for this, learning the difference between the two, and pointed it at the dark hillside beyond the garden wall, and cast the most complex shield he knew. Then he pushed harder. He'd never pushed past the point where it was working, had always eased off at adequacy, trained to conserve as if he were running out of something. He didn't ease off this time. He kept pushing, kept feeding the spell, kept asking more of it, and the shield expanded and expanded, solid as stone and perfectly shaped, until it covered the entire garden and the house behind him in a dome of force that he could feel humming at the edge of his awareness like a second skin. He held it for 60 seconds. Then he let it go, all at once, and the release of it exploded outward in a wave of pressure that bent the trees at the garden's edge and sent every bird in the meadow into the sky in a single startled cloud of wings. He stood in the aftermath, breathing hard, grinning at the dark. Somewhere south-southeast, something very old was gathering its strength. Harry was not afraid of it. That was the thing, that was the new thing, the thing that had changed when the last suppression fell away. He was not afraid. He was interested, which was different, which was dangerous in the best way, the way his father's voice in the commonplace book was interested in everything, the way his mother's handwriting moved through legal language with the confidence of someone who understood that the law was a tool and she knew how to use tools. Voldemort was coming. Harry knew it. Ragnar knew it. Augusta knew it. Let him come. He walked back inside, and the house lit his way, and he slept like a stone in deep water. The Daily Prophet's morning edition hit the wizarding world like a dropped cauldron. Harry read it at the kitchen table with tea and toast and the detached interest of someone watching a storm from inside a well-built house. The headline occupied most of the front page. Gringotts files formal grievance. Potter heir declares number 4 Privet Drive a crime scene full, filing names Dumbledore as primary respondent. Ancient houses support expedited hearing. Below that, a subheadline that someone in the Prophet's editorial team had apparently decided needed to be included even if they weren't sure what to do with it. Ministry scrambles for response. The article was, for the Prophet, unusually accurate, because Ragnar had provided the journalists with the full filing, which was primary source material, and there was a limit to what you could distort when the original document was right in front of you. It covered the core suppression, the vault withdrawals, the will, the custody issue. It had a direct quote from Ragnarok that read, "The law applies without exception to all parties. This has always been Gringotts' position. We are surprised it requires clarification." Harry's favorite part was the photograph, not of him, but of the exterior of Potter Manor, clearly taken by a photographer who had tried to get closer and been prevented by what the caption described as formidable estate wards. Which was accurate. The manor's wards had apparently extended themselves outward by another 100 yards sometime in the last 2 days, which Harry had noticed but not initiated, meaning the house had done it on its own. He was finishing his second cup of tea when Hermione fled in, already talking. 3 responses from Wisengamot members this morning, 2 supportive and 1 hostile, and the hostile one is Umbridge, which honestly just confirms everything. And the minister made a statement that's so carefully non-committal it practically has negative information content, and she stopped, saw his expression. "You've already read it. Had it with breakfast. And Ragnarok is going to be pleased with the quote placement." He looked up at her. "Sit down, Hermione. Have some toast." "I don't want." "Yes, all right, fine." She sat, took a piece of toast with the automaticity of someone who is too busy thinking to engage their physical self deliberately. "What's our next move?" Ragnarok handles the formal response to the Wisengamot's scheduling request. Augusta handles the political outreach to Bones and Greengrass. He gestured between them, prepare for the hearing. 30 days. 28 now. She was quiet for a moment, chewing. Then, they're going to come at you. I know. Not just legally, personally. The prophet will turn. They always turn. Fudge will find a narrative. They'll say I'm unstable, Harry said. Power-hungry. That I've been manipulated by Gringotts for financial or political reasons. That I'm a grieving orphan being exploited. He recited them with the calm of someone who has pre-read the playbook. Probably some variation on all 4. Hermione stared at him. You've been preparing for the smear campaign. Since about day 2. He smiled at her expression. My dad's commonplace book has a whole section on wizarding political counter-messaging. Written in 1975. Still entirely applicable. Of course it does. She shook her head, but she was smiling. Okay. What does it say? It says the best defense against a false narrative is a true one delivered first, clearly, and without apology. Harry refilled his tea. Which is what the filing did. The next step is visibility. They can't make me the villain if everyone can see what I'm actually doing. So we need you public. We need me public. Harry agreed. Not performing, not the chosen one, not the boy who lived. Just, he thought about it. What I actually am. Which is someone who found out what was done to him and decided to do something about it. Hermione considered him across the table with the look she wore when she was updating her model of something. You've changed, she said. Not in a bad way. Just, you're different. The house, he said simply. The magic? The magic and the house, and not sleeping in a cupboard. He shrugged. Apparently I had opinions this whole time. Just no room to have them in. She laughed, a real one, short and bright, and then picked up her books with the smooth efficiency of someone shifting modes, and they spent the next 4 hours preparing for what was coming, and it felt like sharpening a sword, and neither of them minded the work at all. By evening, 2 more owls had arrived from families Harry didn't know, old blood families, neutral names, the kind of people who watched carefully and wrote carefully and were now watching something change and writing to establish, carefully, that they were interested. Harry wrote back to all of them. Careful, direct, warm without being eager. His mother's legal precision and his father's enthusiasm finding a middle ground that was beginning to feel natural. He sent the letters out as the sun went down, and watched the owls go, and felt the manor settle around him in the evening quiet, and thought about 30 days. 28 now. He was going to be ready. Chapter 4. The Wiesengemot moves the hearing notice arrived 22 days after the filing. Not 30. Not 28. 22, which meant someone on the Wiesengemot scheduling committee had either been very efficient or very afraid, and Harry's experience with bureaucratic institutions suggested the latter. Ragnarok received the formal document, read it, and sent Harry a note that said simply, expedited. 10 days. They're rattled. Good. The notice specified a full formal hearing, not a preliminary review, not a closed session, a full hearing of the Wiesengemot in the chamber at the Ministry of Magic. It also specified, in language that had the quality of something drafted by someone who wanted to control the framing before it escaped them, that the hearing was ostensibly about the unauthorized relocation of a minor ward of the state and the circumvention of established guardianship protocols, which was their way of trying to put Harry on trial for leaving Privet Drive rather than examining why Privet Drive had been a crime scene. Harry read the notice over Ragnarok's shoulder in the formal meeting room and said, "They're going to try to make it about me." "Yes," Ragnarok said. "That's not going to work." "No," Ragnarok agreed. "Because we have the evidence, and they have the framing, and evidence beats framing when the room is full and the press has a seat." He tapped the notice. "I've already confirmed press access. Under Wiesengemot transparency rules, any formal hearing open to the full body is a matter of public record. The Prophet will be there. Several independent journals as well. I took the liberty." "Good." Harry set the notice down. 10 days. "Are you ready?" Harry had spent the last 22 days doing nothing but becoming ready. He'd read everything in the library relevant to Wiesengemot procedure, which was a great deal, because the Potters had apparently been involved in enough formal proceedings over the centuries to accumulate a comprehensive collection. He'd trained every morning in the garden, which had become something between meditation and combat practice, learning what his magic could actually do when not throttled, and what it could do was considerable. He'd met Augusta Longbottom's allies, Amelia Bones, who was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and had the bearing of someone who'd been waiting for legal grounds to act on suspicions she'd been nursing for years, and Lord Cassius Greengrass, quiet and deliberate and privately furious about the direction the wizarding world had been drifting. He'd spoken to Arthur Weasley on the Saturday, as planned. That conversation had lasted 3 hours, and at the end of it Arthur had sat back in his chair with the expression of a man reorganizing everything he thought he knew, and said, "I need to think about some things." And Harry had said, "I know." And they'd sat in comfortable silence for another 10 minutes before Arthur left. He'd exchanged 12 more letters with Sirius, each one a little longer and more real than the last, full of details and memories and the particular shorthand of two people discovering they understood each other without needing to build up to it. Sirius had sent him a photograph, taken by someone Harry didn't recognize, in what looked like a small cottage, Sirius standing in the garden with a cup of tea and that familiar slightly wild grin, thinner than the Azkaban photos Harry had seen but more alive in every other way. Harry had pinned it to the wall above his writing desk, next to his parents on the Manor steps. He was ready. "Yes," he said to Ragnarok. The morning of the hearing, Hermione arrived at 7. She came through the flue looking like she'd been awake since 5, which she had, because she'd left Harry a note in their ongoing correspondence that said exactly that, up at 5. Reviewing the 1956 precedent again. "I think Ragnarok's application of it is strong, but there's a nuance in the third subclause that I want to discuss before we leave." Harry had read this note, written back "See you at 7, and gone back to sleep. She found him in the kitchen, already dressed in the robes he'd found in a wardrobe on the Manor's second floor that turned out to contain formal wear from the last several generations of Potters. His grandmother's things, his grandfather's, his father's from what had clearly been his adult years. He'd chosen a set that fit him closely enough, deep charcoal gray with the Potter crest embroidered in silver at the collar, clean and formal without being ornate. He'd found his father's crest ring in a box in the library 2 days ago, and put it on without overthinking it. It had settled on his finger like it recognized the hand. Hermione stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at him. "You look like a lord," she said. "I am a lord," Harry said, pouring tea. She sat down. The third subclause of the 1956 precedent applies to cases where the bank initiates the complaint independently, Harry said. But we have the codicil from my parents will authorizing Gringotts to act on my behalf, which makes it a hybrid complaint, bank initiated but heir authorized. Ragnock covered this in his notes from day 4. She stared at him. You read Ragnock's internal legal notes. He left them in the meeting room. Those were his working documents. He left them in a room I use every day. I think he left them deliberately. Harry handed her a mug. He does that sometimes. Leaves things where I'll find them. Hermione accepted this with the particular expression she had for things that were strange but made complete sense once articulated. Right. She wrapped her hands around the mug. Harry, are you nervous? No. He considered it more carefully, because she deserved a careful answer. I'm alert. Like before a Quidditch match. But not nervous. That's probably worrying, she said. Or accurate. He sat across from her. The thing is, I'm not the one in trouble today. I know it's framed like I am. But the evidence is all on our side, the legal argument is all on our side, the precedent is on our side, and I have Ragnock, you, Augusta, Amelia Bones, and the Longbottom family seats. What exactly should I be nervous about? She looked at him for a moment. The political machinery. The way established institutions protect themselves. Against evidence? Against embarrassment. She said. It's different. Institutions don't respond to truth the way people do. They respond to what threatens the institution. And what we're doing today threatens some very comfortable arrangements. Yes, Harry said. It does. He smiled. Good. She shook her head, but her own expression had gone from concern to something closer to determined. She was wearing her own formal robes, not the elaborate kind, but clean and well cut, her hair pulled back with a precision that said this is an occasion I have prepared for. She looked exactly like what she was, someone who had done all the reading and was ready to prove it. Neville arrived at 7:30, Augusta in tow, and the formal sitting room of Potter Manor became, for 40 minutes, a war council. Ragnock was already there, seated at the table with his 2 permanent goblins and a leather case the size of a small trunk that contained everything they were putting before the Wisengamot. He brought a colleague Harry hadn't met before, a goblin called Sharklaw who was introduced as the bank's senior litigation expert, and who had the focused intensity of someone who finds courtrooms genuinely enjoyable. Augusta sat beside Ragnock without any detectable awkwardness, because Augusta Longbottom had clearly decided that competence was the criterion for respect and Ragnock had demonstrated competence, so that was settled. Sequence, Ragnock said, and the room came to attention without anyone having to be told. The Wisengamot will open with formal charges as they've framed them, the relocation issue. That's their attempt to control the terrain. We let them finish. Lord Potter, you will be asked to address the chamber first. Not Sharklaw? Harry asked. You. Ragnock was firm. The legal representation follows the heir's statement. If the legal team speaks first, this becomes a procedural dispute. If you speak first, it becomes what it actually is. What is it actually? Neville asked, with genuine curiosity. An account of what was done to a person, Ragnock said, given by that person, in public, under oath, in front of a body that has legal obligation to respond. He looked at Harry. It's not a legal argument first. It's a human one. Then it's a legal argument. Harry nodded. What do I say? What you told me in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. Ragnock held his gaze. The truth. Without apology. The Ministry of Magic was busy. Harry had been there in 5th year for his own hearing and had seen it in the early morning, nearly empty, vast and echoing. He'd never seen it full, and full was what it was at 9 in the morning on hearing day. The atrium had the particular quality of a space where something significant is understood to be happening, people moving faster than usual, conversations cut short, eyes tracking toward the lifts with the fractional attention of people trying to look like they weren't paying attention while paying intense attention. Harry walked through it with Ragnar on his left and Hermione on his right and Neville and Augusta behind them, and the crowd did what crowds did when someone they recognized came through: rippled, parted, adjusted, recalibrated. He didn't slow down for it. He didn't speed up either. He walked at the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was going there. Someone in the crowd said his name, and then someone else did, and by the time they reached the lifts there was a murmur that followed them like a wave behind a boat, and Harry paid it no attention at all. On the lift down, Hermione said quietly, "There are more people here than there should be for a standard hearing." "Word got out," Augusta said, with satisfaction. "I may have mentioned the schedule to a few individuals." Ragnar looked at her. Augusta looked back. Something passed between them that might have been mutual professional appreciation. "Good," Ragnar said. The Wisengamot chamber was full. Harry had known it would be, he'd prepared for it, but knowing and standing in the doorway looking at it were different things. The chamber was circular, tiered, seats rising in concentric rings above a central floor, not unlike the feeling of a Quidditch stadium, he thought, though he suspected that was not the intended atmosphere. The seats were occupied by Wisengamot members in plum-colored robes, and beyond the formal seating there was a gallery, and the gallery was packed. He could see press badges on several robes. He could see faces he recognized, ministry officials, people he'd seen in newspapers, a scattering of Hogwarts professors he hadn't expected. Dumbledore was not in his customary Chief Warlock's seat at the head of the chamber. His seat was empty, which told Harry something, not that Dumbledore was absent, but that he'd voluntarily recused himself from presiding, which was either principled or strategic, or both. In the Chief Warlock's seat sat Amelia Bones, who caught Harry's eye across the chamber, and gave him the minimal nod of someone who has arranged to be precisely where they are for specific reasons. Cornelius Fudge sat 3 seats to the left of center, in the minister's position. He was wearing lime green robes that managed to project both authority and anxiety, and he looked like a man who had spent 10 days trying to find the correct response to this situation and had not succeeded. Harry walked to the center of the floor and stood there. The room took a moment to finish settling. He used the moment to look around it, not performing confidence, just actually looking, reading the room the way he'd learned to read a dueling opponent. Where were the eyes? What were the bodies doing? Who was leaning toward whom? He counted 4 distinct clusters of Wisengamot members who were leaning slightly toward each other in the conspiratorial way of people who have made a prior arrangement about how to vote. He counted 6 who were watching with the careful neutrality of people who hadn't decided yet. He counted the long-bottom seats, Augusta and Neville to his right, Augusta already projecting the particular iron authority of someone who has been waiting for this room for 14 years. Amelia Bones called the chamber to order with a stroke of her wand that sent a clean crack of sound around the stone walls. "This session of the Wisengamot is called to hear the formal grievance filed by Gringotts Wizarding Bank on behalf of Lord Harrison James Potterblack, and to address related matters of wizarding law and estate procedure." Her voice was precise and carried without effort, the voice of someone who has run a great many meetings and will not be having any nonsense at this one. "The formal notice of complaint has been entered into the record. The respondent, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, is present in the gallery." Harry didn't turn to look. He knew where Dumbledore was sitting. He'd placed him by peripheral vision when he walked in, upper gallery, 3rd row, center. He could feel the old man's attention on him like a specific quality of air pressure. "Lord Potter will address the chamber," Amelia said. Harry turned to face the center of the room, chose a point slightly above the assembled members' heads, not staring anyone down, just addressing the room as a whole, and spoke. "3 weeks ago," he said, "I was 15 years old, living in a house that wasn't mine, with people who didn't want me, in a bedroom I'd been given as an improvement over the cupboard I occupied for the first 10 years of my life." He paused, not for effect, but because he was choosing each thing carefully. "I knew my parents were dead. I knew I was famous for something I didn't do, or rather, something I survived, which is a different thing. I knew there was a war coming, because I'd watched a man come back to life in a graveyard 2 months earlier, and I'd held a dead boy's body while it happened." Another pause. What I didn't know was that for 15 years, my magic had been suppressed by the wards on that house. What I didn't know was that money had been withdrawn from my family's vaults without my consent or knowledge. What I didn't know was that my father had written a will naming a guardian for me, and that will had been ignored. He let that sit for a moment. What I didn't know was that I wasn't supposed to be there at all. The chamber was very quiet. Not the quiet of discomfort, the quiet of a room that is listening. Gringotts brought me the truth, Harry continued. They brought me evidence, legal documentation, a full audit. And when I left Privet Drive, when Gringotts formally declared it a crime scene under the laws that govern magical estates, under laws that exist precisely for situations like this one, I left. That's the act this hearing is ostensibly about. He looked at the tier where he'd identified Fudge's cluster. My unauthorized relocation. He let the phrase carry its own absurdity. I left a crime scene when the investigating authority gave me legal clearance to leave. I went to my family home, which is my legal property, where I have full right of residence. And I'm standing here today because the institutions that were supposed to protect me are uncomfortable that I found out what they missed. He straightened slightly. I'm not angry at this room. I'm asking it to do its job. The evidence is substantial, it's been submitted in full, and Gringotts' legal team will walk you through every line of it. I just wanted you to hear from me first, what this actually was. Not a procedural irregularity. Not an unauthorized relocation. He looked at the chamber steadily. Someone kept me in a cupboard for 10 years and suppressed my magic and stole from my family, and ignored my father's last wishes. I would like the Wisengamot to consider whether those things require a response. He stopped. He'd said what he needed to say. He stepped back, not retreating but completing a thought, and Sharklaw moved forward from beside Ragnarok to take the floor. The silence in the chamber lasted for perhaps 5 seconds. Then it broke into sound. Sharklaw was extraordinary. Harry had expected competence. Ragnarok's team had demonstrated nothing but. What he hadn't expected was the particular pleasure that Sharklaw took in the work, the way a goblin litigator with several centuries of wizarding law in his head navigated a chamber full of political agendas with the precise, lethal grace of someone who had been waiting for exactly this case. He presented the evidence in sequence, which was ruthlessly logical, core suppression first, because it was the most visceral and the most clear-cut, the diagram of Harry's magic siphoned back into the ward structure laid out in enlarged form on a conjured display. He presented the auditor's testimony through a magical record, a goblin called Grip Hook who had completed the Privet Drive assessment, and described the ward structure in technical language that Sharklaw then translated for the chamber into something any first-year charms student could understand. The ward structure at number 4, Privet Drive, Sharklaw said, suppressed the magical core of Lord Potter by 37% over a period of 15 years. The suppressant was not total, it was calibrated, which our assessment suggests was either a very sophisticated accidental architecture or a deliberate design choice. He paused to let that land. Lord Potter's magic found channels around the suppression on numerous occasions, evidenced by documented incidents of accidental magic, all of which are recorded in ministry files which we have included as exhibits. He produced a bound volume. 36 incidents over 13 years. The ministry attributed these to instability. They are, in fact, the documented evidence of an extraordinary magical core fighting its own suppression. Several Wisengamot members had stopped making notes, and were just listening. He moved to the vaults. He moved to the will. He moved to the custody issue, which was the one Harry watched the chamber respond to most viscerally. There was something about a named guardian being simply ignored, a man's last wishes for his son set aside by someone else's unilateral decision, that reached people who hadn't been reached by the legal and financial material. Fudge attempted an intervention twice. Both times, Amelia Bones declined to recognize him with the quiet efficiency of a referee applying the rules as written. The third time he tried, she said, "The minister may speak during the response period, minister," with a pleasantness that contained absolutely no flexibility. Dumbledore did not speak. Harry had noted this. He was watching from the gallery with an expression that was difficult to read from a distance. Not defeated, not defensive, something more complicated. Attending, Harry thought. Paying attention. Doing what he was apparently doing in Harry's letter. Being present, without trying to manage. Harry respected it, even as he registered that it didn't change anything. After Sharklaw, Ragnak himself spoke. He was different from Sharklaw, less theatrical, more absolute. He stood in the center of the floor, looked around the room once, and then spoke with the specific authority of a being who is several centuries old and has run the most powerful financial institution in the magical world for most of them. Gringotts, he said, does not file formal complaints. In 400 years of operating in Britain, we have filed 11. Today is the 12th. He let that establish itself. We do not file frivolously. We do not file for political purposes. We do not file because we dislike the named respondent, though I will observe that the named respondent has held a Gringotts account in good standing for 63 years, which means we have had a professional relationship of considerable length. Something moved in his expression. The reason we file is simple: the law was violated. Significantly? Repeatedly. Against a child, over a period of 15 years. The law does not become less violated because the violator is powerful or well regarded or believed to have good intentions. He looked at the tier where Fudge sat. It also does not become less violated because it would be politically convenient for it to be. Fudge went a specific shade of puce. The Goblin Accord of 1782 exists. Ragnak continued. Because this chamber agreed, at that time, that certain protections for magical persons were inviolable. Not conditional on status. Not subject to the discretion of individuals who believed they knew better. Inviolable. He looked around the room one more time. Gringotts is asking this chamber to remember what it agreed to. He sat down. The chamber was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then the response period began, and it was chaos. Not disorganized chaos. The Wiesengemot had procedures for everything, including chaos, but the particular chaos of a political body that has just had the ground shifted under it, and is trying to figure out which way to fall. Voices from different tiers, Madame Bones recognizing each in turn with the smooth authority of someone conducting a very complicated orchestra. Some members spoke in support, measured, careful support, with the quality of people who had been wanting to say something for some time and were now doing it through the medium of formal procedure. Some spoke against, with the quality of people who felt their arrangements threatened and were covering it in the language of concern. Fudge got his turn. He stood, adjusted his robes, and spoke with the prepared quality of a man who had rehearsed this, and the slightly shaky quality of a man who had realized in the last 2 hours that the speech he'd prepared was insufficient. The Ministry, he said, has the deepest concern for the welfare of Harry Potter, who has been, a ward of. I am not a ward of the Ministry, Harry said. He said it clearly, not loudly, but it cut through the room because the room was quiet and because it was exact. Fudge blinked. Lord Potter, the response period is, Minister Fudge just described me as a ward of the Ministry, Harry said, addressing Amelia Bones. That is a factual error that I'd like corrected for the record. I am the heir of an ancient and noble house and lawful residence at my ancestral seat. I have never been a ward of the Ministry. The Ministry has never had legal guardianship over me. If it believed it did, that belief was unfounded. He paused. Please continue, Minister. Amelia Bones made a note. Her expression gave away nothing, but her note-making hand had the quality of someone writing something down with genuine satisfaction. Fudge tried to recover. He talked about stability. He talked about the importance of established protocols. He talked about the welfare of children in care arrangements, as if Harry had been in a care arrangement rather than a house that had been declared a crime scene. He talked around Dumbledore without naming him, which was the political equivalent of talking around a large piece of furniture in the middle of the room by claiming the room had good bones. Harry let him finish. When the response period ended and Amelia invited Harry's team for final statements, it was Hermione who stood. This had been planned, Ragnak had suggested it, Because a 17-year-old Muggle-born witch presenting the final legal summary sent a specific message about who was in this room and what they stood for. She stood in the center of the floor, and she was, Harry thought, magnificent. Not in a showy way, in the way she was always magnificent, which was through sheer comprehensive preparation. She had read everything, understood everything, organized it into an argument so clean and so precisely referenced that dismantling it would require dismantling the legal framework of wizarding Britain going back to the 17th century. She addressed each point raised in the response period in sequence. She cited precedents that Harry had heard her muttering in her sleep, practically. She did it in 12 minutes, and when she sat down, the chamber was the quietest it had been all morning. Amelia Bones called for the vote. It was not unanimous. Harry hadn't expected unanimous. The Wizarding World's political body was not going to agree about anything without several abstentions and a block of holdouts. But the majority was substantial, and it went the way it needed to go, the formal finding that the acts described in the Gringotts complaint constituted violations of wizarding law, the referral of the financial charges against the unauthorized vault instruments to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the formal ruling that Harry's residence at Potter Manor was lawful and unchallenged, and, in the final item that carried by the slimmest margin but carried, the appointment of an independent inquiry into the Ministry's oversight failures related to the Potter estate. Fudge looked like a man who had just sat on something sharp. After the vote, in the brief administrative chaos of a chamber officially adjourning, while Ragnarok was exchanging documents with Sharpclaw and Augusta was saying something to Amelia Bones that made the head of the DMLE nod with sharp decisiveness, Neville moved close to Harry and said quietly, "He's coming down." Harry turned. Dumbledore was making his way from the gallery through the side access stairs, moving through the thinning crowd with the care of someone navigating rather than striding. He looked older than Harry had seen him look, not in a frail way, but in the way of someone who has just watched something he built be examined in public light and found, in that light, deficient. He stopped 3 feet from Harry. "Harry," he said. "Professor." Harry kept his voice level and his face open. Not cold, he didn't feel cold. He felt clear. "I owe you," Dumbledore began. "You don't have to do this here," Harry said. "I know you want to. But not here." Dumbledore stopped. He looked at Harry, that particular look, the one that had always made Harry feel simultaneously seen and managed, and something in it was different today. Less certain. The assessment in it was still there, but it had lost the quality of a man reading a chess piece and was something more like a man looking at another person. "You're not what I expected you to be," Dumbledore said, and it came out with a plainness that Harry recognized as honesty stripped of performance. "You're very much your parents." "Is that a problem?" Harry said. "No." The old man's voice was quiet. "It was a relief. Once. I thought it had become inconvenient. I'm finding now that I was wrong about the framing." He straightened slightly. "I will cooperate fully with the inquiry. You have my word." "I know you will," Harry said. "That was never in question." Dumbledore looked at him for another moment, then nodded, slowly, differently than his usual nod, with none of the authority and all of the sincerity, and walked away. Hermione appeared at Harry's elbow. "Was that, yeah? How do you feel?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Like something complicated just got a little simpler." He looked at her. "Not simple. Just simpler." She nodded. That was enough. They took the long way out of the Ministry because the short way was clogged with reporters, and even the long way acquired 3 journalists who materialized at corridor intersections with the alarming navigational ability of people who had been waiting for exactly this route. Harry stopped for 2 of them. He decided this in advance, not a press conference, not a statement read from notes, just answers to direct questions given directly. Ragnarok stood slightly behind him during these exchanges, not to manage them but to observe, and Harry could feel him making assessments. The first journalist was a young woman from a publication Harry didn't know, small and serious, who asked him what he wanted people to understand about the hearing. That it was about the law applying to everyone, Harry said. Not about me specifically. The law is supposed to protect people regardless of who they are or who's been making decisions for them. Today the law did that. That's not remarkable, it's supposed to be normal. The fact that it feels remarkable says something we should probably think about. The second journalist was from the Privet and was older, more careful, watching Harry with the specific attention of someone taking the temperature of something they didn't fully understand yet. What happens next? He asked. The inquiry does its work. The DMLE investigates the financial charges. I go home to my manor and study for my OWLs. Harry paused. And whatever's coming, Voldemort, the war that everyone knows is starting, we handle it from a stronger position than we were in yesterday. That's all. The journalist wrote something down. You're not afraid. Of which part? The man looked up. Any of it. Harry looked back at him with the equanimity of someone who had spent 3 weeks becoming certain. No, he said. Not really. He walked out of the ministry with Ragnar and Hermione and Neville and Augusta, into a late afternoon that was cooling toward evening, the sky over London going from blue to the particular luminous grey of a clear summer dusk. Ragnar's team split off at the apparition point with crisp efficiency, documents to file, correspondence to send, the machinery of victory running its next cycle. Ragnar shook Harry's hand. Not the quick functional shake of professional courtesy, a deliberate, firm grip with both hands, the goblin formal acknowledgement of something completed. Well done, he said. We're not done, Harry said. No, Ragnar agreed. But today was done well. He released Harry's hand. Tomorrow we discuss the inquiry terms and begin the Black Estate formal transfer. With today's ruling establishing your legal majority in estate matters, we can accelerate the process. Serious, Harry said immediately. We're working on it. Faster now. Something shifted in Ragnar's expression, not warmth, exactly, but the approximation of it that seemed to be what he had available. Go home, Lord Potter. Rest. You'll need it. He disappeared into the apparition point, and then it was just the 4 of them on the pavement, Harry, Hermione, Neville, Augusta, and for a moment, nobody said anything. Augusta was the one who broke it. Your father, she said to Harry, would have made an insufferable amount of noise about this for weeks. He really would have, Harry said. Your mother, she continued, would have found 3 additional legal avenues he missed and exploited them before he finished celebrating. That tracks, Hermione said from beside Harry in the tone of someone recognizing a description of herself. Augusta looked at her sharply, then at Harry, and then she did what Harry had been waiting 3 weeks to see, she smiled. Fully, completely, with the warmth of someone who has been saving it, and has decided the moment is appropriate. Good work, she said to all of them and to none of them specifically. All of you. Then she took Neville by the arm and they disapparated. Hermione looked at Harry. Home? Home, Harry said. They stepped into the apparition point, and Harry thought of the manor, the library and the garden and the fire and the hum in the walls, and felt himself pulled toward it like a tide toward the shore. He arrived in the entry hall of Potter Manor, and the lights came up and the house hummed its low welcome around him, and he stood for a moment in the warm familiar quiet of it, and let the day settle into shape. The hearing was done. The filing was in. The inquiry was commissioned. The law had done what the law was supposed to do. He walked to the kitchen, because he was hungry and because normal things mattered, and made enough pasta for 2 because Hermione would stay for dinner, and he knew it, and by the time she appeared in the kitchen doorway, shrugging off her formal robes to reveal the jumper underneath, the water was boiling and the aga was warm and the evening outside the window was going gently to dark. We should write to Sirius tonight, she said. Already planned to, Harry said. After dinner. What are you going to say? He thought about the day, sharp claw in the chamber, Ragnar's hand on his, Dumbledore's face with the certainty stripped from it, Fudge in his lime-green robes running out of floor to stand on, Amelia Bones calling the vote with that flat, precise voice that left no room for anything but the result. I'm going to tell him it's almost over, Harry said. The hiding part. He stirred the pasta and let the kitchen fill with ordinary steam, and the manor settled around them both, and something that had been coiled tight in Harry's chest since the night the owl came to Privet Drive finally and completely unwound. Almost over. And then what came after? He was looking forward to it. Chapter 5. The Walls Come Down. Sirius Black arrived at Potter Manor on a Tuesday. Not through the flue, through the front door, walking up the garden path in the early morning like someone coming home from a long trip, which was exactly what he was doing. He was thinner than his photographs and taller than Harry had realized from them, with the kind of face that had clearly been handsome before Azkaban had carved its work into it, and was becoming handsome again with the slow return of something like ease. He was carrying a single bag over one shoulder. He hadn't bothered with formal robes. Harry heard the gate and went to the door and opened it before Sirius reached the steps. They looked at each other across 15 feet of garden path and 12 years of absence. Sirius opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Harry with the specific expression of someone trying to find the right thing to say and discovering that the right thing was too large for words, so he set the bag down on the path and crossed the distance, and wrapped both arms around Harry with the force of someone who had been thinking about doing this for 12 years and was not interested in doing it halfway. Harry hugged him back just as hard. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The garden was quiet around them, morning birds and the smell of the overgrown roses and the warm stone of the house at Harry's back. "You're tall," Sirius said finally into his shoulder. "You're thin," Harry said. "Working on it." He stepped back, held Harry at arm's length, looked at him with eyes that were doing a very comprehensive inventory. You look like James with Lily's eyes, which everyone says, but also you look like yourself, which I suspect is new." "Fairly new," Harry agreed. Sirius looked past him at the manor. Something moved across his face, not grief, something more layered, the expression of a place that holds two things at once. "Your dad used to host the worst poker games here," he said. "He cheated with a charm on his glasses. We didn't figure it out for 3 years. Harry stepped aside. "Come in. I'll make breakfast." Sirius picked up his bag and walked through the front door of Potter Manor for the first time in 15 years. The formal clearing of Sirius Black had happened 6 days after the Whisked hearing, which was a speed that had surprised everyone except Ragnak, who had been building that case simultaneously with the main filing and had simply been waiting for the political moment when it became possible to submit it without it being buried. Amelia Bones had received the full dossier, Gringotts' forensic work on the Azkaban commitment records, the absence of any trial documentation, the testimony from the one Auror who had been present at the original arrest and had been quietly troubled by it for 12 years, and had moved with the efficiency of a head of the DMLE who had finally been given permission, in the form of a changed political landscape, to do what she'd always thought needed doing. The hearing had taken 4 hours. Peter Pettigrew's culpability had been established through Gringotts' documentary evidence. They'd found the Fidelius records, the original secret keeper documentation, which named Pettigrew and not Sirius as the keeper, and which had been misfiled in a way that Ragnak described as aggressive misfiling, and which Harry suspected meant deliberate concealment. The Whisked had deliberated for 40 minutes. Sirius had been issued a full formal exoneration and a compensation settlement that he'd immediately told Ragnak to put into a fund for children affected by Voldemort's war, which was the kind of thing that made Harry understand completely why his father had loved him. The Prophet had run it as front page. Twice, once the day the exoneration was granted, and again when the compensation figure was made public and then redirected. Rita Skeeter had somehow gotten hold of the story and written something that was, for Rita Skeeter, relatively accurate, possibly because the facts were dramatic enough without embellishment. Harry had read it with wary approval. Fudge had issued a statement welcoming the exoneration. It had the quality of a statement written by someone who had been cornered into welcoming something. Harry had noticed, in the aftermath of the hearing, that the political landscape had shifted in ways that were visible if he knew what to look for. Fudge's block in the Whisked had shrunk, not dramatically, but measurably, the way a sandbar shrinks when the tide shifts, a few members repositioning toward neutral in ways that suggested they were recalibrating their alliances. The independent inquiry had begun its work under a commissioner Amelia Bones had selected personally, someone Harry didn't know but whom Augusta had described as principled to the point of social inconvenience, which Harry took as high praise. And the wizarding world, which had spent a year being told by the ministry that Harry Potter was unstable and attention-seeking, was doing the thing that the wizarding world did when its official narrative collided hard enough with visible reality. It was quietly, collectively, revising. He saw it in the letters that came to the Manor's Owl Post, which had become considerable. He saw it in the change in tone from prophet reporters who'd previously been writing him as an unreliable narrator of his own experience. He saw it in the way Diagon Alley went when he visited with Hermione to get supplies. People who caught his eye didn't quickly look away or drop their gaze in the uncertain way they had last summer. They met his eyes. Some of them nodded. The world was paying attention. Harry found he didn't mind. He made eggs and toast and strong tea, and Sirius ate with the particular focus of someone who had been eating institutional food for a decade and had not yet lost the wonder of meals with actual flavor. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table with the morning coming through the window and the comfortable quiet of people who have established, in the first 5 minutes, that they don't need to perform anything for each other. Sirius asked about the hearing. Harry told him, the full version, the parts that had been clean and the parts that had been complicated, and the moment with Dumbledore in the chamber afterward. Sirius was quiet for a moment after that. How do you feel about him? Dumbledore. Complicated, Harry said. He's not a villain. He cooperated with the inquiry, fully and without obstruction. His testimony actually strengthened several of our secondary points because he was scrupulously honest about his reasoning, which just confirmed what we'd argued. Harry turned his mug in his hands. I think he's a good man who made a catastrophic error of philosophy, decided that protecting the mission was more important than protecting the person the mission was supposedly about. And I think he knows it now. He's always known everything, Sirius said, with an edge that was old and deep. Knowing something and understanding it are different. Harry looked at him. You know what Azkaban was. But you still flinch when rooms are very cold. Sirius went still for a beat. Then he let out a breath that was more complicated than a sigh. There. I'm not defending him. What he did was wrong, and the consequences of it are going to take years to fully untangle. But if I spend energy on hating him, I'm spending energy I need somewhere else. Harry looked out the window at the garden. Voldemort's out there. Peter Pettigrew's out there. There are Death Eaters regrouping in a ministry that's still not fully functional and a community that's been trained for 20 years to be afraid. He looked back at Sirius. I don't have room for hate. Sirius studied him across the table with an expression that was several things at once, pride and grief and something that looked like awe, which sat slightly strangely on a face that had clearly been built for reverence. Your mum used to say something like that, he said finally. She and James used to argue about it. James wanted to fight everything, Lily wanted to understand everything first. He considered. Both somehow. Is that useful? It's terrifying, Sirius said, which was clearly a compliment. He reached for the toast. What do we do today? Ragnarok's coming at 11. There are documents for you to sign, the formal confirmation of the Black estate transfer into trust, and the co-guardianship filing which establishes you as my legal guardian with full standing. After that, I want to show you something in the garden. The garden. He looked through the window. It's a disaster. It's magnificent, Harry said. Come at it from the right angle. Ragnarok arrived at 11 with Charclaw and a stack of documents that required 2 hours of careful work, Sirius reviewing everything with a thoroughness that Harry suspected came from 12 years of having nothing to do but think about everything that had been done to him without proper legal process. He signed where he needed to sign, asked sharp questions where the language was ambiguous, sharper questions than Harry had expected, and Ragnarok noted each one with the satisfaction of someone who approves of precision in others. And when it was done, The co-guardianship was formal and legal and entered into the Gringotts record. The ministry will receive formal notification this afternoon, Ragnarok said. Given the current political climate, I expect no objection. Fudge will object, Sirius said. Fudge is currently occupied with the inquiry, Ragnarok said, with an expression that suggested he found Fudge's current preoccupations deeply satisfying. He has limited capital to spend on objections. After Ragnarok left, Sirius stood in the formal meeting room and looked around it with the expression of someone taking full possession of a moment. He looked at the Potter crest on the wall above the fireplace, the table and chairs, the shelves of formal documents. He looked at Harry. This is real, he said. Very real, Harry said. I've been in hiding for a year and a half. Living in a cottage in Scotland that Peter Pettigrew wouldn't have wanted to stay in, which is... He stopped, recalibrated. I've been telling myself the important thing is that you're all right. But I didn't know what all right looked like for you, because I'd never had enough time to see it. And now? Sirius looked at him. You're better than all right. He said it like he was still processing it. I looked up what you did in the Triwizard tournament. After I got out, Amelia Bones showed me the full file on the third task and the graveyard. The complete file. That wasn't published. No. But Bones thought I should see it. Sirius's jaw moved. What you did in that graveyard. 15 years old, wandless at first, against him, and you came back. He stopped. I have thought about your parents every day for 12 years. I thought about you every day. And when I got out and started understanding what had actually happened to you, where you'd been living, what you'd been doing, I was furious and guilty in the way that makes it hard to breathe. Sirius, I know. I know you're fine. I can see you're fine. He let out a breath. I just needed to say it out loud. That I'm sorry. That if things had been different, things were what they were. Harry said. And now they're different. He met Sirius's eyes. We've got time. That's the thing. We actually have time now. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. We do. The afternoon settled into something comfortable and ordinary and entirely new, Sirius exploring the house with the particular attentiveness of someone who knew it in a different life and is discovering that the version of it in his memory and the version in front of him are the same thing from a different angle. He found the piano in the music room and played 3 chords experimentally, which wasn't playing the piano so much as testing the piano's patience. He found the secret panel in the master sitting room and stood there looking at it with his hands in his pockets, and something quietly enormous on his face. He found the commonplace book in the library, and Harry left him alone with it for an hour, which turned into 2. When Sirius emerged, his eyes were slightly red and his bearing was straighter. He didn't mention it. Harry didn't ask. They went to the garden. The garden in the afternoon had the kind of light that made the overgrown roses look intentional rather than wild. Harry walked Sirius to the center of the meadow lawn and stopped there, the same spot where he'd first let his magic off its leash a month ago. I want to show you something, Harry said. And I want to ask you something afterward. Sirius spread his hands. Proceed. Harry didn't use his wand. He simply opened the thing he'd learned to open over the last month, that habitual clench, the containment he'd been doing his whole life without knowing it, and let his magic exist, fully, in the space around him. The grass flattened in its circle. The air went warm. The light changed quality in the immediate vicinity, not visibly but palpably, in the way it changes near something that is genuinely hot. He raised one hand and conjured, not cast, conjured, which was a distinction he'd been working on since finding a specific section in his grandfather's spell library, a full and detailed replica of the garden as it had been in the photographs from the manor, as it existed in his father's commonplace book, the kitchen garden in order, the roses shaped rather than wild, the lawn properly itself. The conjuration hung in the air for 30 seconds, translucent and exact, a garden-shaped memory made temporarily visible, and then he released it, and it faded like breath on glass. Sirius stared at the empty air where it had been. You learned to conjure, he said. 2 weeks ago. James couldn't conjure until 6th year. He looked at Harry. Lily could by 5th, but Lily was exceptional. I know. And the wandless, since the suppression lifted. Harry pushed his fringe back from his forehead. It's not perfect yet. Complex spells still benefit from the wand. But simple to moderate, yeah? Sirius sat down on the long grass. Just sat cross-legged, like a man who needs to be closer to the ground for a moment. Harry sat beside him. What did you want to ask? Sirius said. I want to train, Harry said. Properly. Not school defense, real training, the kind that prepares for what's actually coming. I've been reading about what aura training covers, and it's good, but it's still institutional, still calibrated for standard threats. What's coming isn't a standard threat. He looked at the hills beyond the garden wall. I want a dueling mentor. Someone who knows what Voldemort and his people actually do, not the textbook version. Sirius was quiet for a moment. You're asking me? You were in the Order. You trained under Mad-Eye Moody in the First War. You were considered one of the best 6 duelers of your generation, and I know that because I found it in a ministry report that Amelia Bones left in the meeting room after her second visit. Harry met his eyes. You know what real combat magic looks like. I want to know what it looks like. The look on Sirius's face went through several things quickly: surprise, something close to grief, and then a slow, settling determination that Harry recognized as a man finding his footing. I'm rusty, Sirius said. Then we'll both improve. Moody's style is brutal. Good. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Starting tomorrow? Starting now, Harry said. Sirius looked at the sky, the garden, the house behind them. Then he stood up and rolled his sleeves to the elbow and pointed at Harry. 20 feet apart. Show me your shield. Harry moved back 20 feet, put his shield up, the dome version, the one he'd been working on, and felt it settle over him like second skin. Sirius looked at it from the outside, circling slowly, studying the edges. Too large, he said. A dome that size costs you mobility. You're protecting a perimeter instead of a person. It's strong. Strong doesn't matter if you can't move inside it. Collapse it to half. Harry collapsed it to half. Feel the difference in cost? It's cheaper, Harry said. Now move. Walk forward while holding it. Harry walked forward, keeping the shield. It didn't falter. Sirius sent a sharp stunner at his left side without warning. The shield took it easily. Now move right and cast something back. They worked for an hour in the garden, and the overgrown roses looked on, and the manor hummed its low steady hum, and by the end of it Harry was sweating and sharpened and Sirius's rusty edges were already visibly smoothing. Tomorrow we do this longer, Sirius said, breathing harder than he'd probably like to admit. And I want to see your offensive range. You'll see it, Harry said. Sirius looked at him with something that was settling into an expression Harry was starting to recognize as the one Sirius wore when something was good, and he hadn't quite worked out how to hold that yet. Your dad would have been unbearable about this, he said. He'd have been showing off constantly. I know. Harry smiled. I'm showing off right now. I'm just doing it quietly. Sirius laughed. Properly, the slightly wild laugh that Harry had heard in memories and in letters and was now hearing in person for the first time, and it sounded exactly right, like the last piece of something slotting into place. The attack came at 2 in the morning. Harry was awake before the wards triggered, which told him his magic had already registered something. He was out of bed with his wand in his hand before the Manor's alert system, a deep resonant pulse that ran through the floor and woke everyone inside, had finished its first cycle. He pulled on his training clothes and was in the corridor, already reaching for the ward's information, before Sirius emerged from his room in the state of someone who has not lost a soldier's reflexes regardless of circumstance. North perimeter, Harry said. He could feel it in the ward structure. The Manor's wards were his now, part of the feedback he'd been building with the house, and the information came as sensation rather than sight. Pressure against the north wall, multiple points, coordinated. How many? Sirius was already holding his wand, already focused. 4. Maybe 5. Harry moved down the corridor. Not Voldemort, wrong signature. Death Eaters. Probably. Neville, who was staying over after a late study session, appeared from the guest room. He had his wand and his robes and the particular expression he'd been wearing more frequently in the last weeks. Not frightened, just set. Ready. What do I do? Second floor landing, Harry said. If anything gets through me and Sirius, you're the stop line. He met Neville's eyes. Nothing's getting through me and Sirius. Neville nodded and went to the landing without argument, which was exactly right. Harry and Sirius took the stairs to the ground floor and split, not because they'd discussed it, but because they both understood, from the ward map Harry was reading and the instincts Sirius had built over 15 years, that the entry hall and the east wing needed separate coverage. Sirius went left. Harry went straight to the front door, opened it, and walked outside. The night air was cool. The garden was very dark, the moon behind cloud, only the faint phosphorescence of the ward markers at the property line visible in the dark, 6 of them, lit in amber, which meant someone was applying pressure to the ward boundary at 6 points. Harry walked to the center of the lawn and stood there. The ward boundary held. The Manor's wards were old and deep, layered over centuries, and the month of Harry's presence had strengthened them. The feedback between Harry's magic and the house's settled enchantments had been building since the first night, and what had been maintained but untested was now active and inhabited and significantly more formidable for it. I can feel you out there, Harry said, at a volume calibrated for the night air. The wards are logged. Whatever you're doing to them is being recorded. He paused. Gringotts will have the forensic report in the morning. A moment of stillness from the dark outside the boundary. Then one of the boundary pressure points resolved into something more aggressive. A concerted push, multiple wands working in concert, pushing against the ward membrane at one point. The amber marker at the north wall flared yellow, which meant strain. Harry reached into the ward structure and pushed back. Not subtly. Not with the careful, measured output of someone conserving resources. He pushed the way his father's notes had described, the release, the full open-handed response of a magical core that had been calibrated down for 15 years and was now running at actual capacity, and the yellow marker went back to amber, and the concerted push stopped instantly, like a hand pulled back from a hot surface. The silence lasted 10 seconds. Then a voice from outside the boundary, male, cultured, familiar in the way that some voices were familiar not because you'd heard them but because you'd read about them. The boy is predictable. Harry waited. Come outside, Potter. Have a conversation. I'm having a conversation, Harry said. The boundary is intact. You're on the other side of it. Seems like a fine setup. A short silence. Then a different pressure on the wards, not the blunt force of before but something more finessed, something probing for gaps or weaknesses, moving around the perimeter the way water moves around a rock, looking for the way through. Harry tracked it. The house tracked it with him. Each probe hit the ward's surface and found the same answer. No. Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. I'm guessing. The voice sounds right. Nothing confirmed or denied it, which was confirmation. You've come here in the middle of the night to what? Harry said. Threaten me? Through wards that aren't going to break? With your face covered so no one can prove you were here? He let that settle. The inquiry into the Ministry's oversight failures is currently in its second week. Amelia Bones is running it. The Commissioner has already requested documentation from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement that relates to certain financial relationships between senior Ministry officials and the families of known Death Eaters. He paused. You should probably be home managing that. The perimeter probing stopped. The amber markers went steady. Long silence from the dark beyond the boundary. Then Sirius's voice from behind Harry. They're pulling back. All 6 points. Harry kept his eyes on the tree line beyond the garden wall. He could feel the withdrawal in the ward structure, the pressure releasing point by point, the ward membrane settling back to its resting state. In the dark beyond the boundary, something moved, the particular quality of disapparition, multiple points, the sound of it swallowed by the night air. Then nothing. Just the dark and the garden and the manor behind him. Sirius came to stand beside Harry. He looked at the tree line for a moment. You knew it was Malfoy. The probe pattern, Harry said. His son uses the same approach in Quidditch, looking for the gap rather than the direct challenge. He learned it from somewhere. Sirius turned to look at him with an expression that had passed through impressed, and come out the other side at something closer to what is this person. You diagnosed the Death Eater's probe pattern from his son's Quidditch style. And the voice. It was the voice. Right. Sirius was quiet for a beat. Mad Eye is going to love you. They went back inside. Neville was waiting on the landing with a look that said he'd heard everything and was processing. They're gone? He asked. Gone, Harry confirmed. Neville let out a breath. Were they actually going to? I don't know, Harry said. Test the wards, definitely. Deliver a message, probably. The kind of message where you show up in numbers to demonstrate that you can show up in numbers. Whether it would have become something else if they'd gotten through. He shrugged. They didn't get through. No, Neville said. They didn't. He looked at Harry with the expression he'd been wearing more and more, like he was getting used to something that kept exceeding his expectations but had stopped surprising him. Back to bed? Back to bed, Harry agreed. I'll reinforce the outer ring tomorrow and add a detection layer that activates without alerting anyone inside. I don't want the house waking everyone every time someone's dog wanders too close to the boundary. Practical, Sirius said with the tone of someone who approves of practical. Harry woke at 7 having slept completely, which he took as a good sign. By 9 he had drafted the incident report for Gringotts, the incident report for Amelia Bones at the DMLE, and a note to Augusta Longbottom because Augusta liked to be informed of things before she read about them elsewhere. Hermione arrived at 9:30 and spent 20 minutes being furious about the attack in the focused, useful way she was furious about things, channeling it immediately into research on additional ward strengthening techniques, 2 of which Harry hadn't found yet and both of which were in a volume his grandfather had written. Neville owed his grandmother, who replied within the hour, good. They're afraid. That's useful. Keep the wards up. Ragnar's response to the incident report arrived at noon. It was 3 words, as expected. Document everything. Sirius read all the responses, looked at Harry and said, You have a better team than most people have at 40. They're not my team, Harry said. They're my people. Sirius considered the distinction. Right, he said. That's different. Completely. The morning's training session ran longer than planned, because the previous night had given both of them material to work with. Sirius pushed harder, the rust now mostly gone, and Harry discovered that having someone genuinely good to train against was a different experience from any practice he'd had before. The DA had been Harry teaching people his level or below, which was valuable but one-directional. This was mutual and fast, and occasionally humbling and always educational. Your instinct under pressure is to attack, Sirius said, after an exchange that Harry had ended with an aggressive offensive push rather than a defensive reset. That's good. But it's readable. If someone knows you well enough, they'll bait that instinct. How do I fix it? Vary it. Not every time, you don't want to lose the attack instinct, it wins fights. But add 3 or 4 moments where you do the unexpected thing. Defend when they expect offense. Redirect when they expect block. Sirius reset his stance. Again. Harry varied it. He got hit twice in 10 minutes, which was 2 more times than the previous session, and came out of both hits faster than he'd expected. Better, Sirius said, which Harry was learning was Sirius's version of excellent. In the afternoon, Hermione sat them both down with her ward research, and they went through the reinforcement plan she'd developed with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has made a project outline with subheaders. The outer ward ring was extended by another 60 feet by evening, the detection layer added and calibrated, and 2 new defensive constructs anchored to the property's corners that Harry had found in his grandfather's notes, and Hermione had found cross-referenced in 3 other sources. At 6, Fudge resigned. The news came by OWL, an official ministry announcement, formal language wrapped around a decision that read, between the lines, like a man understanding that the floor was no longer there. The inquiry had, in its 2nd week, uncovered the extent of the ministry's failure to oversee the Potter guardianship arrangements, and the secondary finding regarding certain financial relationships between ministry departments and old blood families was creating the kind of political heat that required someone to absorb it. Fudge was apparently the chosen absorber. Harry read the announcement at the kitchen table with Sirius on his left and Hermione on his right, and felt something he hadn't expected, not triumph. Something more complicated. The recognition that this was the right outcome and also that it was only one piece of a much larger structure that still had to be addressed, that Fudge's resignation cleared the board without actually winning anything, that the next minister would face the same pressures unless the structure itself changed. He said as much. Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when he'd articulated something that matched her own analysis exactly. The inquiry needs to go past the guardianship issue, she said. It needs to look at the broader pattern of how the ministry manages information. How it responds to threats it finds politically inconvenient. Bones, Harry said. She can push the inquiry scope. I'll write to her tonight. Sirius was reading the announcement with an expression that was moving through several things. This is because of the filing. Because of what you started a month ago. Because of what Gringotts started, Harry said. I just didn't get in the way of it. Harry. Sirius put the announcement down and looked at him directly. I was in Azkaban for 12 years. I spent a year after that in hiding, unable to do anything useful, watching everything continue to be wrong and being unable to affect any of it. And then you, at 15, in 3 weeks, with a goblin and a library and 3 friends, did more to fix the structural rot in this community than anyone managed in the whole decade after Voldemort fell. He held Harry's gaze. Don't minimize that. Harry thought about it honestly. I had standing, he said. The estate, the houses, that's what made it possible. Anyone with that standing and that evidence could have done it. But they didn't, Sirius said. Because they didn't want to. Because it was easier not to. He leaned forward. You're not special because of the scar, Harry. You're special because of this. Because when you found out what was done to you, your first instinct wasn't to hide or to forgive or to make it comfortable for everyone. It was to fix it. The kitchen was quiet. My mum's legal instincts, Harry said finally. My dad's attack-first approach. Ragnar's procedural framework. Hermione's research. Augusta's political understanding. Neville not flinching. He looked around the kitchen, the familiar warmth of it, the aga, the window onto the garden. I'm not doing any of this alone. No, Sirius agreed. But you're the one holding it together. Hermione, who had been watching this exchange with the alert stillness of someone who knows when not to speak, looked at Harry across the table and gave him the small, firm nod that meant, yes, that's accurate, acknowledge it. He acknowledged it. Okay, he said. We're doing something. Something significant. Sirius said. Something. Hermione agreed, with the precision of someone who understands that specific language matters. That is not finished yet. Harry thought about the probe patterns on the wards last night. He thought about Peter Pettigrew, still at large, carrying information back to Voldemort. He thought about the gathering in the south-southeast that he'd felt that first night in the garden, whatever had been building there, building still. He thought about the graveyard, the cold weight of that magic, the face that was both ancient and rawly new, reconstructed from dark ceremony and desperate need. Voldemort had seen him in that graveyard. Had taken his blood. Had made a point of it, which meant he'd wanted something from the act beyond the ritual purpose. Wanted Harry to understand that he was known, that he was located, that there was no distance that would keep him safe. What Voldemort had not accounted for was that Harry had not been fully himself in that graveyard. He'd been suppressed, throttled, running on 63% of his natural capacity, while simultaneously in shock and outnumbered in a hostile ritual space. That was not who Harry was now. He thought about the shield dome in the garden, the quality of it. The conjuration. The morning's training was serious, the way his magic moved when he wasn't fighting its own constraints. He thought, let him come. And then he thought, no. Not let him come. Make him come. On our terms, on our ground, when we're ready and not before. He reached for parchment. I'm writing to Bones tonight, he said. And to Ragnarok. And I want to talk to Mad Eye. Is he reachable? Sirius straightened. The easy quality of the dinner table shifted slightly, became the quality of the first training session. He's reachable. He's been in contact with me since the exoneration. He has thoughts about the current situation. I imagine he does. Harry uncapped his ink. Can you arrange it? Here, if he's willing. I'd rather have this conversation where I can speak freely. He'll come. Sirius said it with the certainty of someone who knows the person in question well. He'll probably arrive 3 hours early disguised as a garden ornament. Tell him not to, Harry said. The wards will flag him, and I'd rather not have a training incident. Sirius looked at him. Then he grinned, that full, slightly wild grin that belonged to the photograph on Harry's wall and to the man sitting across from him and to a version of this house that existed 15 years ago, and said, Your dad would have sent an actual letter, signed it James Potter, and then been baffled when Moody showed up as a flower pot anyway. I'm sending the letter, Harry said. What he does with it is his business. He wrote. The house hummed around him, steady and deep. Outside, the garden was dark and quiet, the wards silver steady at the perimeter, the hills black against the sky beginning to fill with stars. The walls had come down, the ones that had kept him contained, the ones that had kept others from seeing him clearly, the ones that had been built around his heritage and his magic and his choices by people who thought they knew better. All of them, piece by piece, over the last month, dismantled. What was left was just him, just Harry, in his parents' house, with his godfather across the table and his best friend beside him and his magic running warm and unobstructed through everything he touched. Voldemort was gathering. The wizarding world was waking up. And Harry Potter was done hiding what he was. Chapter 6. The morning after the war, before Mad-Eye Moody arrived at Potter Manor at 4 in the morning disguised as a stone birdbath. Harry discovered this when he went out to the garden at 6 for his morning training and found a birdbath that had not been there the previous evening, positioned in the center of the meadowlawn with the specific quality of stillness that suggested it was working very hard at being a birdbath. The magical eye was the tell. It wasn't quite flush with the stone surface, rotating with a faint grinding sound that genuine garden ornaments did not make. Harry stopped 6 feet away and looked at it. Sirius told you not to do this, he said. The birdbath resolved itself into Alastair Moody with the aggressive efficiency of a man who finds transformation moderately inconvenient, but entirely worth it. He was shorter than Harry had expected and broader, with the scarred face and the magical eye and the leg that hit the grass with a prosthetic thunk, and he looked at Harry with both eyes simultaneously, the real one assessing, the magical one already moving to the manor's walls, to the ward boundary, to the tree line beyond. Your letter said the wards would flag me, Moody said with the voice of a man who has gargled gravel professionally. They did. I wanted to see what you'd do about it. I reset the detection threshold on the north perimeter after the Malfoy visit, Harry said. The ward marked you when you crossed the outer boundary. I watched you from my window for 20 minutes before I came down. Moody looked at him with both eyes pointed at the same thing for once. You watched me for 20 minutes. You were very convincing as a birdbath, Harry said. I wanted to see how long you'd maintain it. Something happened on Moody's face that was probably the closest it got to a smile. Constant vigilance, he said, which was clearly both a maxim and an assessment. Constant vigilance. Harry agreed. Do you want breakfast? Moody wanted breakfast. He ate a substantial amount of it with the efficiency of someone who eats for fuel rather than pleasure, and sat across from Harry at the kitchen table with the quality of presence that Harry associated with people who had been in genuine danger enough times that they'd stopped spending energy on social performance. He didn't warm up to things. He arrived at them. "I've read everything," Moody said, meaning the filing, the hearing, the Whisked proceedings, the Gringotts audit. "Ragnak sent it. We have an arrangement." "Everyone seems to have an arrangement with Ragnak," Harry said. "He's the most competent being in Britain." "Of course, everyone has an arrangement with him." Moody looked at Harry steadily. "You handled the political piece well. The Malfa probe, well. The training Sirius described, better than I expected for where you started." "Thank you. I'm not finished." He pointed a fork. "You're 15 and you've cleared some significant legal and institutional ground. What you haven't done is face Voldemort prepared. Because last June you were operating at 63% capacity in the worst possible conditions, and you survived on nerve and some genuinely inexplicable magic." He put the fork down. "Nerve runs out. Inexplicable magic runs out. What doesn't run out is preparation. That's why I asked you here," Harry said. Moody looked at him for a moment with both eyes. "Most people ask me here and then spend the first hour managing my directness," he said. "You didn't do that. You're not being rude. You're being accurate." Harry met his gaze. "I know what I faced in that graveyard. I know what's coming. Tell me what preparation actually looks like." So Moody told him. Sirius arrived at 7 and found Harry and Moody at the kitchen table covered in parchment, Moody laying out the actual combat patterns of known Death Eaters with the specificity of someone who had spent 30 years studying them. Not their preferred spells, their habits, the physical tells before they cast, the patterns they fell back on under pressure, the gaps in each fighter's defenses that became visible in the third or fourth exchange when the rehearsed techniques ran out and instinct took over. Sirius stood in the doorway for a moment. "Moody," he said. "Black." Moody looked up. "You're late." "I was asleep. Like a normal person." Sirius got himself tea and joined them. "What did I miss?" "Everything about Dolohov," Harry said. "Dolohov leads with his left," Sirius said immediately, sitting down. "Even when he casts right-handed, there's a left shoulder drop about half a second before." "That's in the file," Moody said, tapping the relevant parchment with one gnarled finger. "He also recovers to center before his second cast, which creates a 1-second window." He looked at Harry. 1 second is significant. "It's everything," Harry said. They worked through the morning with the focus of people who understand that what they're doing is not academic. Hermione arrived at 8, registered the situation without needing explanation, and immediately located herself where she was most useful, cross-referencing Moody's tactical assessments against her own research on defensive counter-magic, identifying 2 places where his recommendations could be refined by a more recent development in shield theory that she'd found in Harry's grandfather's notes. Moody accepted her input without condescension, which Harry noted. He updated his recommendations where she was right, which was most of the time, and explained his reasoning where he disagreed, which she then disputed with 3 sources, and they arrived at something better than either had started with. Harry watched this process with the appreciation of someone who understands what good collaboration looks like and knows better than to interrupt it. Neville came through the floor at 9. He stopped when he saw Moody, and something in him recalibrated in the way it always did when he faced something difficult. A breath, a reset, a quiet decision. His parents had been tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange. Moody had been held prisoner, in his own trunk by a Death Eater wearing his face. There was specific weight between them that Harry felt but didn't name. Moody looked at Neville with both eyes. "Longbottom," he said. "Sir?" Neville said. "Your father was the best reflexive caster I ever worked with," Moody said, in the same direct tone he used for everything, which stripped it of sentimentality without stripping it of meaning. "Not the most powerful. The fastest. He could shield and attack simultaneously in a way that took most Aurors 5 years to develop." He paused. "I imagine that's in you somewhere." Neville was very still. I haven't found it yet, he said honestly. We'll find it, Moody said, and moved on to the next parchment, and the morning continued. Augusta arrived at 10, which Harry had not expected but retrospectively should have, because Augusta Longbottom did not wait to be invited to things she considered herself relevant to. She walked into the kitchen, assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds, poured herself tea, and sat down. Moody looked at her. Augusta. Alastair. She looked at the parchments. Tactical assessment? Combat preparation. Good. She settled herself. I have news from the political side that relates. She did. The interim minister had been appointed the previous afternoon, Amelia Bones, which was not the outcome anyone had anticipated because Bones had been the one running the inquiry, but which made complete sense once it happened, in the way that good decisions often felt inevitable after the fact. She'd accepted with conditions. The inquiry would continue under an independent commissioner, the ministry's internal oversight structure would be reformed within 6 months, and the DMLE would operate with genuine independence from political interference, which was a thing it had not done for the better part of a decade. Bones as minister, Harry said. She'll be effective, Augusta said. She's principled in the way that doesn't bend under pressure. And she's already made her first significant decision. Which is? She's reconstituting the Order of the Phoenix, Augusta said. Formally, with ministry support and a legal structure rather than a shadow organization operating on one man's authority. She asked me to relay the invitation to you. Augusta looked at him steadily. She'd like you to attend the first meeting. The table was quiet for a moment. Moody was watching Harry with his magical eye pointed directly at him, which always felt like being read in some deep and comprehensive way. Sirius had his hands wrapped around his mug. Hermione was looking at her books with the studied neutrality of someone who has a strong opinion and is deciding whether to voice it. Neville was watching Harry with the frank attention he'd been perfecting over the last month. When? Harry said. Friday, Augusta said. Here if you're willing. She thought this house was appropriate. Here's fine. Harry looked around the table. All of you, obviously. Obviously, Hermione said, which answered her own question about whether to voice her opinion. There's one more thing, Augusta said. She reached into her robes and produced a letter, sealed with an unfamiliar crest. This arrived for you this morning, through the Gringotts secondary post. It's from Narcissa Malfoy. The table went still in a different way. Harry took the letter. The seal was precise, controlled, the handwriting on the outside the same, the handwriting of someone who has been disciplined into elegance. He broke it and read. Lord Potter, you do not know me well. You know my son, whom I suspect you know as an adversary. You know my husband by reputation and by last month's events, the details of which I am not in a position to address directly. I am writing because I have information that is relevant to your situation, and because the situation in which I find myself makes traditional channels of communication both dangerous and inadvisable. I am not in a position to come to you openly. I am in a position to correspond carefully, through channels that my husband does not monitor. What I know pertains to the timing and nature of the next planned movement against you specifically, and against the broader community by extension. I am not providing this information out of loyalty to your cause. I am providing it because I have a son, and the path the Dark Lord is currently committed to does not end anywhere I want my son to be. If you are willing to receive this information, respond through the same channel. If you are not, I will understand. N.M. Harry set the letter down flat on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Sirius. Sirius's expression was complicated, the wariness of someone who'd fought a war against these people layered over something more personal, the specific complexity of family. Narcissa was his cousin. It's a trap, Moody said immediately. Classic extraction technique. Appear to defect, get close, relay information back. Possibly, Harry said. Also possibly not. The risk is manageable, Harry said. If the information is verified through Ragnarok before we act on any of it, which it will be. He looked at Moody directly. The thing about trap assessment is that it cuts both ways. If she's genuine and we dismiss her, we lose intelligence we need. If she's genuine and we're cautious, we gain it and lose nothing. He paused. What does she gain from this if it's not genuine? Getting close to me? She can't get close to me. I'm not going to meet her in person, not yet. Relaying disinformation? Only valuable if we don't verify it. He picked up the letter. I'm going to respond. Through Ragnarok, with verification built in. Moody looked at him with both eyes for a long moment. You'd have been a good orar, he said, which was both a compliment and an acknowledgement. I'm going to be something better, Harry said. Respond through the channel? Respond through the channel. Harry wrote back to Narcissa Malfoy. The letter was brief and careful. He was willing to receive information. All information would be verified independently. Her identity and the content of her correspondence would not be disclosed without her explicit consent. He offered, in exchange, what protection the Potter estate's legal standing could provide to anyone in genuine need of it. He sent it through the Gringotts secondary post and turned back to the table. Right, he said. What's next? The week before the Order meeting was the most productive of Harry's life. Every morning, training with Sirius and Moody, who had established a working rhythm that was occasionally explosive and consistently valuable. They sparred in the garden with a seriousness that was nothing like the DA's careful sessions. This was combat magic practiced at speed, corrected in real time, pushed past comfortable until the corrections became instinct. Harry's reflexes were already fast. What Moody was building was the architecture beneath them, the decision-making that happened in the half-second before reflexes engaged, the combat intelligence that chose the right response rather than just the fastest one. By Wednesday, Harry was consistently landing hits on Moody that the older wizard was not entirely letting through. By Thursday, Sirius watched one exchange from the garden wall and said nothing, which from Sirius meant it had been good. Every afternoon, politics, correspondence, the ongoing management of what they'd built. The letters from neutral families had become regular correspondence, some of them graduating from careful to candid as trust accumulated. 2 Wisengamot members who had voted against the filing had written, separately, in the week after Fudge's resignation, with the particular quality of people who have reconsidered their position and are exploring whether there's a way back. Harry answered both thoughtfully and without crowing, because crowing was his father's instinct, and it had occasionally cost James Potter alliances he could have used. Narcissa Malfoy's second letter arrived on Thursday through Ragnarok, with a verification note attached in goblin script that said simply, checked. Internally consistent. Source appears genuine. The information in it was specific and alarming, not about an imminent attack, but about the structure of Voldemort's current operation, the way it was organized differently from the First War, more decentralized, less dependent on Voldemort's direct presence, designed to continue functioning even if the center was disrupted. It was the kind of organizational intelligence that changed how you thought about the problem. Harry shared it with Moody, who read it twice and then said, She knows the inside of the operation. She's married to someone who does. This changes the tactical picture. Tell me how, Harry said, and Moody told him, and they spent 2 hours adjusting the combat preparation framework around the new information, and by the end of it the framework was better and Moody had the look of someone updating his model of what this particular 15-year-old was capable of. Hermione spent the week on something she'd been working toward since the library, a comprehensive written analysis of the suppression techniques used against Harry and how they related to documented patterns of magical suppression in wizarding history, which she was drafting as a formal document with citations that she intended to submit to the newly reconstituted Wisengamot's Educational Oversight Committee. Her argument was that the detection and prevention of core suppression needed to become a mandatory part of magical law enforcement training, and that the safeguards that should have caught what happened to Harry simply hadn't existed. She showed it to Harry on Thursday evening in the library, 40 pages of precise, relentless argument, and he read it cover to cover and said, Submit it. Under your own name. She looked at him. Not under yours? Under yours, he said. It's your work. And a mother-born writing it sends a message that the Potter name on it doesn't. She held his gaze for a moment. What message? That this isn't just about one powerful family protecting its heir. That anyone can be harmed by these failures, and anyone can identify them and demand better. He handed it back to her. Your name, Hermione. She took the document, looked at it, and nodded with the quiet certainty of someone accepting something they'd been working toward without fully naming it. Ragnarok came every day without exception, because the legal machinery they'd set in motion was complex and ongoing, and he approached it the way he approached everything, as a professional obligation executed at the highest possible standard. On Friday morning, the day of the order meeting, he arrived an hour early and sat with Harry in the kitchen, and gave him the full current picture with the directness Harry had come to rely on. The inquiry was proceeding. The independent commissioner had found 3 additional instances of irregular guardianship arrangements involving children from old families, none as severe as Harry's, but each establishing that the Potter case was not an anomaly but a symptom of a broader pattern of oversight failure. Ragnarok considered this, in his dry way, satisfying from an evidentiary standpoint. The financial charges related to the unauthorized vault instruments were working through the DMLE's investigative process. The outcome was not yet determined, but the direction was clear. The Black Estate formal transfer had been completed the previous week. Sirius was, for the first time in his adult life, in full legal possession of his own affairs, which he was managing with the particular combination of relief and determination of someone who understands what it cost and what it's for. And the Potter estate, the full weight of it, the accounts, the alliances, the property and the legal standing and the political architecture, was operating, for the first time, as intended, not as a resource managed on a minor's behalf by someone else's judgment, but as an instrument in the hands of the person it belonged to. There's one more thing, Ragnarok said, at the end of the briefing. He reached into his case and produced a small box, dark wood, no ornamentation, the kind of container that carries something important rather than performing its importance. He placed it on the table between them. Harry opened it. Inside was a ring. Not a signet ring, something older and more fundamental, a band of worked silver set with a stone the color of deep water that shifted when he looked at it directly, moving through blue-green silver gold, never settling, always moving. On the inside of the band was writing too small to read without a magnification charm, and above the ring in the box's satin lining, a small card in Ragnarok's precise handwriting. Potter founding ring. Inheritance of the Lord of the House. Held in Gringotts since 1947. Returned to the heir per the terms of the estate audit. Harry took the ring from the box. The moment it touched his fingers, the stone stilled, went clear as water, and then slowly, over 3 or 4 seconds, settled into a deep and steady gold. He looked at Ragnarok. What did it just do? Harry said. It recognized you, Ragnarok said simply. It's been waiting since your grandfather wore it. He paused. It's not magical in the functional sense, it doesn't cast or protect or detect. It's a commitment ring. The founding Potters wore it to mark their accountability to the house. Its only purpose is to know its lord. Harry looked at the gold light in the stone for a moment. Then he put it on the index finger of his right hand beside his father's crest ring, and it settled there with the particular rightness of something completing a circuit. Thank you, Harry said. Ragnarok closed his empty case. Gringotts' obligation to the estate is fulfilled, he said. What happens next is yours to direct. He stood. I expect you'll do so competently. I expect I will, Harry said. Ragnarok left, and the kitchen was quiet, and the gold light and the founding ring caught the morning sun and held it. The Order of the Phoenix met at Potter Manor at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday in August, which was 37 days after Harry had opened a goblin's letter in his bedroom at Privet Drive and read the words Lord-level correspondence for the first time. They came through the flow in ones and twos, filling the formal meeting room with a collection of people who had in common the understanding that what was coming was real and the willingness to do something about it. Amelia Bones arrived first, minister now, which still looked slightly new on her, like a coat still being broken in, and took a seat at the long table without ceremony. Moody came next, assessed the room comprehensively without appearing to, and positioned himself in the seat with the clearest side line to the door. Remus Lupin came through the flow looking worn and careful and startled into something warmer the moment he saw Sirius, and the two of them did the thing people do when they've been separated by grief and time and a great deal of bad circumstances, stood close together for a moment, not speaking, recalibrating around each other's presence. Arthur Weasley arrived with Molly, who looked at Harry across the room and made a decision that was visible in her face, a releasing of several complicated weeks of emotion, and crossed to him and put both hands on his face and said, "You look well," in the voice of someone for whom that is the most important thing on the list. "I am well," Harry said. "Thank you, Molly." She squeezed his face once, firmly, and then released him, and they both managed to pretend the emotional weight of the exchange had been entirely normal. Hermione was already at the table with her analysis of the suppression patterns, distributed as a reference document, because of course she'd arrived early and made materials. Neville sat beside Augusta, and the way he held himself in the room, the formal meeting room of his ancestral ally's house, surrounded by adults doing real work, had the quality of someone growing into a space rather than being overwhelmed by it. The last to arrive was Dumbledore. Harry had invited him. This had been deliberate, thought through, a decision he made on Wednesday and not second-guessed since. Dumbledore arrived through the flow with the care of someone who does not assume welcome, stepped into the room, and met Harry's eyes across it. "Thank you for the invitation," he said. "Sit down," Harry said. "We're starting." He sat near the end of the table, not at the head, not in the chief warlock posture or the position of authority he'd occupied in everything wizarding for 60 years, but in the seat of someone who is attending someone else's meeting and knows it, and is making no claim on anything except the right to contribute. Harry stood at the head of the table. He looked around the room, at Bones and Moody and Lupin and the Weasleys and Augusta and Neville and Sirius and Hermione and Dumbledore and 4 others he'd invited through individual correspondence, people Augusta had identified as principled and capable and ready, and felt the weight of it. Not the crushing weight of expectation, the thing he'd carried his whole life, the boy who lived performing his role in someone else's story. Something different. The weight of something he'd built, and chosen, and was prepared to stand behind. "You all know the situation," he said. "Voldemort is active, gathering, better organized than the First War by Narcissa Malfoy's account, which Gringotts has verified as credible." He paused. "The Ministry is functional again, which is new, and we should use it while it is. The Wizengamot has demonstrated it can be moved by evidence, which we should also use. And we have here, in this room, enough capability and enough intelligence to begin building something that isn't reactive." He let that land. The old order was essential, he said, and he meant it, and he didn't look at Dumbledore but didn't look away from him either. It also had structural problems that cost people their lives. Operating in the dark without oversight, without legal standing, without public knowledge, when it went wrong, there was no structure to catch the failure. He straightened. "What I want to build is different. Public where possible. Legally grounded throughout. Accountable to something beyond one person's judgment." He looked around the table. "Including mine." Moody made a sound that might have been approval. "I'm not the leader of this," Harry continued. "Minister Bones has formal authority over the operational aspects. I have legal standing and resources and intelligence access through Gringotts. What I'm offering is the Manor as a headquarters, full access to the Potter Estate's resources, and," he paused, "whatever I am. Which I'm still working out, but I think it's useful." Amelia Bones looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze she brought to everything. "What you are," she said, "is the most politically significant magical person in Britain right now, the holder of 2 of the oldest estates in wizarding history, and apparently a reasonably competent strategist." She looked at her notes. "I'll take it." A sound around the table that wasn't quite laughter but had the same quality, a lightning. "The intelligence from Narcissa Malfoy," Bones continued, moving smoothly into operational mode. "Moody and I reviewed it yesterday. The decentralized structure Voldemort is running means we can't simply target the center. We need to map the nodes. She looked at Moody. Moody laid out the framework he and Harry had developed after reading Narcissa's letter, the organizational map of what they knew, the gaps in what they needed, the specific pieces of intelligence that would, if obtained, give them the ability to disrupt the network before it fully activated. It was detailed and practical and occasionally brutal in its implications, and everyone around the table listened with the attention of people who understood that this was real work, not theory. Hermione presented her suppression analysis, not the full document, a summary, and made the case that the same systematic patterns of magical control that had been applied to Harry could be applied to anyone, that Voldemort's strategy in the First War had included targeted suppression of individuals who posed threats, and that the Order needed detection protocols. Several people around the table shifted as she spoke in the way of people recognizing something they'd half suspected and not articulated. Dumbledore spoke once, briefly, about specific vulnerabilities in Voldemort's magic, the Horcrux question, which Harry had found referenced obliquely in the library and suspected was relevant but hadn't fully understood yet. What Dumbledore said was measured and informed and stripped of the usual Dumbledore quality of knowing more than he was sharing. He shared what he knew. Harry noted it with the particular attention of someone filing something important. He'd follow up. Later, directly. The question of what Voldemort had done to make himself difficult to kill was one that needed a complete answer, and Dumbledore had the pieces of it, and Harry was done letting pieces stay separate when assembling them was what the situation required. The meeting lasted 4 hours and produced a working structure, an intelligence subgroup, a combat preparation stream, a political liaison function that would work with Bones's new ministry openly rather than in the shadows, and a communications framework that used Gringotts' secure channels for anything sensitive. Real things, operational things, things that had names and owners and timelines. When people began to move toward the floor in the early evening, the room had the quality of something that has been started properly, not finished, nowhere near finished, but begun with the right foundations, the way a house that's going to last is built from the ground up rather than assembled in a hurry. Dumbledore lingered. Harry had expected it. He waited while the others went through, Sirius catching his eye and giving him the small nod that meant "I'll be nearby if you need it," and when it was just the two of them in the meeting room with the evening coming through the windows, he gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. They sat. Either of them spoke for a moment. "You did this differently than I would have," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. "I find myself thinking it was better," he said, with the specific difficulty of someone for whom that admission costs something real. "Not because your approach was more effective, though it was. Because it was more honest." Harry looked at the fire. "You kept me small because you thought it was protective. I kept you manageable," Dumbledore said, and the plainness of it, the complete absence of the usual careful framing, was startling. "Because the prophecy required a particular shape from you, and I was afraid that without management, the shape would be wrong." He looked at Harry. "What I failed to understand, for a very long time, was that the prophecy required you. Not a version of you that I had curated. You." He paused. "What you've done in the last 6 weeks demonstrates the distinction rather clearly." Harry looked at him. At the lined face, the eyes that had been brilliant and were still brilliant but had lost a layer of certainty, which made them look somehow more alive. "What do we do now?" Harry asked. Not rhetorically. A genuine question. "I would like," Dumbledore said carefully, "to be useful. Not directing. Not managing. Useful, in the way that someone with 60 years of knowledge about Voldemort's magic and history can be useful to people who are fighting him." He held Harry's gaze. "If that's something you're willing to accept." Harry thought about it honestly. He thought about the Horcrux question. He thought about the decades of Dumbledore's intelligence on a problem that Harry needed to solve. He thought about the distinction between trust and use, not the cynical kind of use, but the practical recognition that a resource well-directed was better than a resource excluded out of principle. "Yes," Harry said. "That's something I'm willing to accept." He paused. "On one condition," Name it. Complete information, Harry said. Whatever you know about what Voldemort did to make himself hard to kill. Whatever you've been working on, whatever theory you're sitting on, I want all of it. Not when you think I'm ready? Now. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, that will require several long conversations. We have time, Harry said. Start tomorrow. Dumbledore nodded, and in the nod was the particular quality of something genuinely conceited, not performed humility, which Harry had seen and recognized, but actual relinquishment of a position held too long. Tomorrow, he said. He left through the flue, and then the room was quiet, and Harry sat in the chair by the fire and let the day assemble itself in his mind. Later, in the garden, in the full summer dark with the stars properly visible, and the wards humming their silver steady presence at the boundary, the people who mattered most were simply there. Sirius on the garden wall with his tea. Hermione in the long grass with a book she was reading by wanlight, because some things about Hermione were elemental and constant. Neville sitting near the roses, telling Sirius about something that had happened in herbology that was apparently very funny, because Sirius kept snorting. Remus had stayed for dinner and was sitting in the garden chair nearest the house, looking up at the stars with the expression of someone rediscovering something they thought was gone. Harry stood in the center of the meadow lawn and looked at all of them and felt something he didn't have a fully adequate word for. Not happy, too simple. Not safe, not quite right. Safety was conditional and the situation didn't warrant it. Something with more edge than either of those things. Ready. That was it. That was the word. He raised his hand and, without thinking about it, wandlessly lit a soft gold light above his palm. Not a lumos, something warmer, something that felt like the founding ring and like his father's desk and like the hum in the manor's walls, all of it concentrated in one gesture. The light moved out from his hand in a slow pulse, warm and steady, and the garden was briefly lit by it. Hermione looking up from her book, Neville mid-sentence, Sirius turning on the wall, Remus lifting his face from the sky. They all looked at Harry. He let the light pulse one more time, then released it. The garden went back to starlight. Showing off, Sirius said from the wall. Always, Harry said, which was his father's instinct and his own truth, and, in that moment, both things at once. Hermione shook her head and went back to her book, which meant she was smiling. Neville said, That was actually quite beautiful, with the honest directness that was becoming his trademark. Remus said nothing, but the expression on his face said something better. Sirius got down from the wall and came to stand beside Harry in the middle of the lawn, the way he'd done every training morning, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the dark hills beyond the garden boundary. He's out there, Sirius said. Yes, Harry said. Coming for you eventually. For all of us, Harry said. Eventually. Scared? Harry thought about the graveyard, the cold of it, the specific weight of Voldemort's magic, the moment of pure and absolute terror when he'd understood what was happening and known he was nearly out of options. He held that memory honestly, didn't flinch from it. Then he thought about the morning in the garden, the shield dome that covered the whole property. The combat sessions with Moody, the way his instincts had sharpened. The Wizengamot chamber, the moment he told Fudge he'd never been a ward of the Ministry, and the room had simply accepted it. The founding ring settling onto his finger. The table full of people today who were there because they'd chosen to be, not because they'd been assigned. No, he said. Not performance, not bravado. Just accurate. Sirius looked at him sideways. Good, he said. Me neither. They stood in the garden of Potter Manor in the warm August dark, and the house hummed its deep familiar welcome at Harry's back, and the wards held the boundary steady and silver, and somewhere in the distance something was building towards something, the way weather builds, slowly, inevitably, with the specific patience of forces that have been set in motion and will arrive in their own time. Harry felt it, and turned toward it, the way he'd been turning toward difficult things his whole life, only now with the full weight of what he was behind the turn. 37 days ago he'd been lying on a narrow bed in a house that wasn't his, listening to someone else's life happen through the walls, holding himself very small in a space that had been kept deliberately insufficient. He'd had his wand under his pillow and his photograph album in a loose floorboard and no real understanding of what he was, beyond a scar and a title and a war he hadn't started. Now he had a house that knew him. A godfather at his shoulder. A team, his people, spread across this overgrown garden being ordinary and extraordinary all at once. The founding ring on his finger and his father's crest beside it. The full weight of his inheritance at his back and the full weight of his magic, unthrottled, unmanaged, properly his for the first time. He knew what was coming. He'd read Moody's files and Narcissa's letters and his grandfather's spell notes, and his father's voice in the margins of a commonplace book. He knew what it was going to cost. He was under no illusion about that. He was still ready. He was, in fact, more than ready. He was the heir of 2 ancient houses and the product of 2 extraordinary people, and the thing that happened when you took 15 years of suppression and removed it and asked what was underneath. He was the boy who'd survived because his mother loved him and the person who'd built something because he was done surviving alone. He was Harry, just Harry, the same kid who'd stood on a train platform not knowing anything and been told it's a return journey, only now was somewhere to return to. Whatever came next, he would meet it here. On his ground. With his people. With nothing held back and nothing hidden and absolutely no interest whatsoever in making it easy for anyone who thought he could be managed. The war before the morning was gathering. The morning would come. He was already in it.